I want to thank everybody for coming along today. My name is Melissa Bull and I'm the Director of QUT Centre for Justice. We're delighted to be hosting this with Lady Musgrave today. It's such an important event. But before we get on with the program, there's another very important thing that we must do. And I'd like to invite Aunty Kerry Charlton to come up and to do our welcome to country. Thank you very much.
Well, it says something when I arrive the same time as our minister. I'm usually a little bit before, but it's been crazy traffic this morning. There's something pretty serious has happened. And so it was a 30-minute delay it turned into. And I started out an hour ago. And I know you've done it an hour and a half. So I just say prayers anyway for anyone affected by that. And pray for healing and well-being out there. So I'd like to say thank you for having me, and I acknowledge the people who are linking in as well by live stream. And I'd like to say Numbali, Yoa, Yuingan. So friendly greetings all. And Marumba Nunyu Nubu. Good morning all. I'd like to thank you for having me here again. It's another one of the welcomes that I've done for your forum, and it's a very important occasion and event. And so I want to acknowledge you, I want to acknowledge the Minister and my countrywoman, of whom we're all proud and highly regard, and acknowledge our old ties all the way back to the South Seas and in Rotuma. And I like to introduce myself. My people are the Thompsons on the, what I say West Yuggera, but around that Ipswich and Leigh, my great-grandmother, the Yuggera great-grandmother was born in the birthing site outside what's known as Leigh now, and I think it was, I don't know if it was named when she was born, but anyway, maybe it was newly named. And she married my great-grandfather, who was a Gurunpal man from Churangeri, Stradbroke Island, from Burriga, Moreton Bay, and which you would all know today is Quandamooka. So we're one of the groups in the Quandamooka native title claim, and proud to be part of Burriga mobs. And having said that, I also want to acknowledge that I have a great-grandmother who was also brought down from up north from the Gulf country, and she through there we also Newfongs. She married a Newfong, the Newfong who came from Rotuma, and came in the same boat with Minister's great-grandfather. And so they're stories that we grew up with all the time, and Welcome to Country is one of those stories that have been handed down or that we continue to practice. So despite a national story or fairy tale that says it's only been happening for 25 years, I can tell you it's been happening much, much longer. And I grew up most of my primary school on Stradbroke, and went to Dunwich State School and lived at 1 mile at the top of 1 Mile Hill there. And we lived that 1 mile out of town because there was a bylaw from way back that Aboriginal people couldn't live closer or be closer to town than 1 mile. So these are all parts of those boundaries, and the boundary street and the 1 mile bylaws and things like that. And that was actually across the whole country. So there's 1 miles everywhere, 2 miles, 5 miles, whatever. And growing up then, being taught different things. And so the Welcome to Country is to welcome people on country for all sorts of reasons. and also to make sure people are safe and they've got good well-being and food sources and things like that. And that's part of today. You know, when you're locals, you know the safe areas and you warn people, but you also, you know, want to be hospitable. And so Gurries, we call ourselves Gurries, we were doing that even despite having been through a, you know, mission system and under the Act. We still kept up ways of welcoming to country. And I know that it's been recorded that there were some of the last major ceremonies, boras on Stradbroke were in the early 1930s, and one of my uncles was quite elderly at the time when he gave those stories for our native title. And so, and the coming of the mining put a stop to it, and changes in the policies and the Aboriginal Protection Act. So, but what we did see there was ways that we did welcome to country, as well as that it adapted to the situations. And I know that there were people along the track who had been away for a long time and come back to live at 1 mile, and so there was quite a welcome given to them. And sometimes our mob tried to make it on the mainland, you know, having recently come out from under the Act, and come back a little bit needing nurturing and healing, but with family, so, you know, and homeless. And a lot did come back because they couldn't make it, and they were homeless. But along that track would be a welcome to country, welcome, and then the real heart of welcome was to start sending furniture and anything they needed to set up again, and send the young ones down to help build little homes, you know, little huts, and all donate timber and go out with them and get timber. So, you know, for a while it might have been sand floors, but over time they got timber floors. So they were all parts of welcoming people back to country and looking out for them. So I just wanted to share that little story anyway this morning as part of today, because that's, you know, the Guri heart is there. And my great-great-great-grandfather was born in this area, and it's on record from 1875. He told a visiting naturalist that he was born in the birthing site that was where the GPO in Queen Street is now. So all that area that went closer to the water was a big birthing site for the area. And he was born here, and his tribe was Muggan. The area was known as Mugginjan. Muggan, which means tulip wood tree, and our tribes are named after the flora. And then our totems, or our yuri, are named after the fauna. So I always say, well, they must have... It was interesting that we came under the Flora and Fauna Act first, protecting us along with the animals in the country. But it's a joke, you know, that in hindsight we can joke about it. But it's interesting. And then right on that site was where the women convict prison was built. So there was something about that feminine energy. And I always like to think that our ancestors were helping them, because some of them were quite active and energetic, up to lots of interesting ways of surviving, let's say, and gave the colony a run for its money. So having said that, I want to give respect to elders past and present and future. I want to acknowledge those to come, those here with us now, and those from yesterday's. And I want to remember the ancestors caring for this country for a long, long time, over 65,000-70,000 years. And I also want to acknowledge all of our neighbouring groups because we had strong ties, and we would go to each other's country and marry in and trade, and sometimes steal each other's women, and then there'd be a battle to get them back. But the kinship system was very strong and very protected, which is when it's written about that Aboriginal people were always fighting because a woman got stolen. That wasn't just part of it. It was a complex and fragile kinship system that had kept us healthy for over 70, 80,000 years. So there were certain laws around that. So I want to acknowledge to the north, and we belong to this group as well. We're in the native title claim, the Gubbi Gubbi claim, to the north there over the Pine River. And we're in Caboolture and Bribie and all that way. And then turning west, we go past Jinnabara people, Jinnabara country, and then we meet up on the range with the Waka Waka people. And then we're coming back around to Burragar, and we go along the Logan River passing Yugambeh, Northern Bundjalung people, and then we come back out into Burragar and the Quandamooka people. And my immediate neighbours, of course, growing up were Noogie, so I always acknowledge the Noogie people and our minister and our ancestors. And even the story around there, which I won't go into, but with those early ancestors and how they looked after each other during those early years, it still comes down today, and we respect that. So I acknowledge those ancestors and those elders who've taught us and kept us going. I'd like to say Natchamara Wanyarina Gurisnya, Torres Strait Islander people, and Dagai, non-Indigenous people, Gamangang, Gogam Nyujum. So I've just acknowledged all of the Aboriginal people of the area, but the country, the continent, and the Torres Strait Islander people, and yourselves and your old people here, and our ancestors that still walk with us today. And I'm sure they're friendly because we're all friendly together here. So I give respect there, and I'd like to say Nuriba Bing Garumba Wanjana Nuro Numbli. May our Great Spirit touch each of you and protect you, and Bibalka Marumba Gindana. Find joy and fun and laughter while you work on Yagara country, and Bibalka Yagara Jarana. Be welcome. Numbly all on Yagara country. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't think there's anything that I can really add to that except to share in the acknowledgement and pay my respects to First Nations people, their customs, laws and creation spirits. Aunty Kerry, I'm very grateful that you've been able to share your story with us. I learn something every time I hear these stories. I learn something about this place that I work on, Meanjin. Every time I see a street that's called Boundary Street, my partner says, okay, I know you're going to tell me the story. So these are important things for us to acknowledge and to remember. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Okay. I'd also, I look out here and I recognise some of you. I know that you are leaders in your field, and it's wonderful to have you here. I would like to acknowledge Minister Enoch, the Honourable Minister Shannon Fentiman, and also Sue and Lloyd Clarke. We're very lucky to have these leaders come and share today with us and share their knowledge. Before we get on with formal proceedings, I just want to talk about why, for me personally, this is a really important day. I said to you that I'm the director of QUT Centre for Justice. When I took on QUT Centre for Justice, it was I think called QT Centre for Crime, Justice and Social Democracy. And I said, well, it's a real mouthful, and what does it actually mean? And it was very focused on criminal justice matters. And I've worked in this field for a very long time, and my experience is that once it gets to the criminal justice system, it's probably too late. So we expanded our centre to become, and we changed our name to become the QT Centre for Justice, which is a multidisciplinary university level centre, which means it includes all of the university, and we have researchers who are social workers in education, in communication, in law, in business, even in engineering. And the idea behind this is when we think about the change, and I don't want to talk about problems here, I want to think about the change we want to see. When we think about that change, who needs to be part of that conversation? And that's one reason why I'm so pleased to be here, because I think it's all of you that need to be part of that conversation as well. Our goal is to empower people, individuals and communities through research that improves opportunities for health, well-being, enhances inclusiveness of work and education, while widening access to justice, including criminal justice. And as I'm sure you're all aware, that to do this, quite often it involves a housing first approach. And we've made some small steps in this space. And you'll find on your seats some examples of work that we've done I have these wonderful colleagues, Danielle Davidson, Bridget Harris and Helena Ming. It's interesting, I've worked with these colleagues in different places over the years, and that papers their work around young people and the impact of family violence on them. There's another flyer which is about the Women's Butterfly Project, and that's something that I work on, and I had the honour of presenting at the last Lady Musgrave Forum, and it's a prevention project that's aimed at reducing homelessness for older women. And the idea there is that, many older women they have a change of circumstance that makes them vulnerable, produces housing stress and makes them vulnerable to homelessness, but they don't actually identify with that community or the crisis. And so what we tried to do was to develop a resource that would actually stop them going off that cliff, so that you might be interested in that. And we have a wonderful partnership with QCOS, and we've just started working together on a very ambitious project which is about ending homelessness for 13 to 16-year-olds, which I know is a really challenging group for us to work with. So having sort of positioned where I am and why I think it's important, I don't really have much more to add, although I am fortunate to be part of a panel a bit later on, but I'm really looking forward to learning more about the challenges in this space and and thinking together with you about what some of the solutions will be. And so, with having said that, I'm going to hand you over to the incredibly capable Leigh Muirhead, who's going to be our MC for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. And welcome everyone to our 14th annual Forum for Women and Homelessness. And as most of you will know, the past 2 years have been very tough due to this crazy COVID world. Thankfully, we were able to still hold our forums, but they were online. Now, a positive from that was that they actually were very far-reaching and probably reached a lot of other people that we normally would not have been able to. So, using that on the positive, we are Zooming today as well. So anyone who was unable to make it, whether it was due to not feeling great, if you have a cough or a sneeze, you know you're not allowed to go out in the public at present. So they can watch it from the comfort of their home in their PJs, or anyone who is remotely out there and couldn't make it in today. So it's fantastic. There is a positive that's come from that. However, it is wonderful to have you all in person and seeing your smiling faces and being able to be here today and discuss ideas and discuss your thoughts, but also hopefully come up with many solutions, which is what it's all about. We do have a C word we like to use in this forum, and that is collaboration. So today, hopefully, we see lots of collaboration and positive solutions. And we do want to be known as, Queensland to be known as the safest state for housing women. So let's get there. A little bit of housekeeping first. If there is an emergency of any kind, please follow staff. We need to head out the main doors where you came in, and there's a lawn out there. The toilets are at the back of the room. There is a wheelchair access toilets as well opposite the ladies, and this is a no smoking area. So we appreciate all your help with that. Let's get underway and bring up a lady who's quite new to this role, the CEO of the Lady Musgrave Trust, Victoria Parker.
I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're all meeting on, the Yagara and Turrbal people. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I also pay my respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us here today. I'd like to especially sing out to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women who play an incredible role in our community, and particularly to the aunties like Aunty Kerry, who do so much to keep our community safe and feeling safe and being safe are underlying themes of what we're here to do today. I'd like to thank Aunty Kerry for such a strong and beautiful welcome. On behalf of the Lady Musgrave Trust Board of Directors, I extend a very warm welcome to everyone here today, those that are here in person and those that are joining us online. I'd like to especially welcome Minister Enoch for attending and thank her for being here. It's really wonderful to have you here. I'd like to welcome and acknowledge some special groups in the audience, those that work on the front line, those that draft and deliver policy, and those that fill in the gaps in between. I'm very grateful for those in the room who have lived experience of homelessness or domestic and family violence. Your presence here is extremely valued. I'd like to say hi to my first boss, Linda Appelt, when she was the DG of Housing back when it was at 1999. It's very special to have you here. I'd like to acknowledge my current boss, Lady Musgrave Trust President Louise Kelly, and board members Alison, Glenn, Leeanne and Joss, who are all joining us today. Thank you for the energy and trust you put into me and the organisation. I'd also like to highlight the diversity of the organisations that are here today. We have many groups from government, Australian Federal Police, Queensland Police Service, Housing, Health, Corrective Services, Office of Women, just to name a few. We have philanthropies, Small Steps for Hannah, the Tim Fairfax Family Foundation, Hand Heart Pocket and Domino's Give for Good. We've got community organisations from near and far, plus social enterprises, universities and corporate supporters. It gives me hope knowing that so many different interested parties are here today. We know that resolving homelessness and domestic and family violence is not the sole responsibility of one organisation. It's a community issue, and the community here today is very impressive. I'd like to share a few words about the Trust. As some of you know, we are Queensland's oldest charitable organisation. We're 137 years old and still going strong. On one hand, that's wonderful. It's great to have experience and legacy. On the other, it's a tragedy that we're still necessary and it's still needed to be operating. We've stayed true to the purpose of the Lady Musgrave all those years ago. We provide practical support to young women and their children at risk of or experiencing homelessness. Today, in 2022, we do that in 3 key ways. Firstly, we provide safe and stable homes. We own 11 properties between Brisbane and Ipswich that provide our tenants a place to call home for around 12 to 18 months. While living in these properties with the assistance of our partners, Churches of Christ, we support our tenants to progress their education and employment aspirations, whatever they may be. And our final way of providing practical solutions is to connect women to the services that they need through our handy guide. Over the 10 years of producing these free handy guides, we've delivered 220,000 copies out into the community. And today will mark the next step in the evolution of this product, but that's for later and not for me to announce. And all of this work is done by a very small organisation. I am the only employee of the organisation, and so we rely heavily on volunteers, supporters, donors and partners. Our funding model relies on philanthropy and donation, and the mad calendar of applying for small packets of money called grants. We don't receive any recurrent government funding, which means we're quite aware of the constant looming funding cliff face. We're small, we're committed and ambitious, and we're at the starting line of a very big period of growth, so watch this space. There are some exciting projects on the horizon. When it comes to partners, we wouldn't be able to do what we do without the partnership of some spectacular organisations, including Keystone Private, the Content Division, Hopgood Gannon and Publicists Worldwide, plus the amazing work of the Churches of Christ team. There is a real buzz in the room, and there's been a real buzz leading up to this event, and I can only put that down to the participation of the speakers who you're all actually here to see, not me. To each of you, I thank you very much. Today is going to be a great day, and not only will we be having some important conversations about important issues, we'll also be testing the boundaries of time and space. We don't have much of it, we've got a huge program, not much time, and if everyone turns up, we're going to be packed to the rafters. So finally, the theme of Homelessness Week, in which we're within, is to end homelessness, we need a plan. Today's program has been designed to help inform that plan, and in my mind, a plan is always stronger when collaborating with others. Today, I urge you all to participate in the program, network with each other, and make the most of the time you have here. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Victoria. And as she just mentioned, she's worked very, very hard, and we will talk a little bit about that later, but we do have an amazing lineup of speakers, so let's get going. To officially open the forum, please welcome the Honourable Leeanne Enoch MP, Minister for Communities and Housing, Minister for Digital Economy and Minister for the Arts.
Well, thank you very much, Leigh, and thank you, Victoria. And can I also acknowledge Kerry, Aunty Kerry, for that warm welcome to country. And like everybody else, every time I hear Kerry speak, I learn a little bit more about language, and I hear different tonation, and I just, learning a little bit more about how to say certain things. So I want to acknowledge that beautiful welcome, so thank you. Can I begin in my attempt of the Jandai language of my people, the Quandamooka people? Yura nari babaja baru wanjayi yura na gurajan jagadan yagara yura. So to acknowledge all of our ancestors, and of course to acknowledge the first peoples of this country, the Yagara-speaking people, who, as you all know, have maintained cultural practices on this country for thousands of generations. Can I also acknowledge Louise Kelly, the President for Lady Musgrave Trust, Victoria, of course, the CEO, and welcome to the role. I'm really excited to see what you're going to be doing in that role. Can I also acknowledge Sue and Lloyd Clarke from Small Steps for Hannah. It's lovely to meet you face to face for the first time today. Representatives from across government and non-government sector, and all invited guests, including those who are online with us via Zoom. I've got a few words here, but I just want to start with a sense of reflecting on the kinds of story that Kerry had shared with us. We think about women at the centre of the conversation today, and women at the centre of the conversation about housing and homelessness. And I think about women at the centre of the conversation on many aspects of our social and community sector. One of the things that I was thinking about while Kerry was speaking was the idea of where I come from, and some of the practices of the women in my family, not just from the Quandamooka people, but from my grandmother's people, the Kanju people from the far north. And we see it in other communities and cultures as well. But there's a particular practice around weaving that brings women together. And this weaving practice, you could see this happening for hours on end, where we sit and you talk and you weave certain very useful items for the family. But every single community across Australia, every single Aboriginal community across Australia has a unique weave that is unique to that location. So for Quandamooka people, there's a unique diagonal weave. It's a diagonal knot that's been recorded in history books. And it's because, every single group works out how to actually do their own way of doing things. But what strikes me in all of that is that obviously each strand that you put together makes a particular weave unique and strong for that area. And I think about the housing community sector and how each of us represent a particular strand in a weave that we're creating. Not one strand alone can do this. You cannot create a basket with one strand. You cannot create a solution with one strand. You have to have a fairly comprehensive weave that might be unique for a certain situation or unique for a certain part of the sector, but you need several strands to make it as strong as possible so that it can last the time. So for me today, this forum is really about announcing the kind of weave that we want to see and what each of us will bring as a strand to that weave. Now, that's a fairly flowery way of looking at things. But ultimately, we have to work together to be able to solve what is a continually troubling challenge that we are all facing, and it is growing every day. Like we know in Australia, almost every week a woman dies at the hands of a partner or an ex-partner. I've got personal stories about that in my own family. I have personal stories about that in my own life in terms of domestic violence, experiences of homelessness myself, experiences of family members who we've had to bury at the hands of because of their actions of their ex-partner. I know exactly what that feels like, but it doesn't make it any easier, and it doesn't make the challenge any easier. And of course, because these are not just statistics, these are women, these are people, and something we ought to remain absolutely shocked by and continue to call out until it is absolutely eradicated. I know many of you have dedicated your lives to this very issue, and you ask the hard questions of leaders and public figures, important questions such as how can we do more now to keep women safe. I am absolutely acutely aware of how central a safe and secure home is for women and children experiencing domestic and family violence. For families escaping domestic violence, having a safe place to go is absolutely critical. Not only do women experiencing domestic and family violence need immediate access to safe and secure housing, but we need to ensure the appropriate supports are in place to help recover from crisis. Sadly, over the last 4 years, we have seen a quadrupling of presentations to our housing service centres related to domestic and family violence seeking a housing solution. There's 4 times as many in the last 4 years through our housing service centres. 4 years ago, we saw 1,091 domestic and family violence related presentations to housing service centres across Queensland. In 2021-22, we saw 4,290 presentations, and these figures continue to grow. So we are living in a time of compounding issues. We all know that housing is under massive stress right now. We've got mass migration into Queensland. We've got the impacts of multiple flooding events that have impacted housing stock. We've got COVID effects on what's happening with housing stock. We continue to have housing supply chain issues, and of course workforce issues. It doesn't matter where you are on the housing continuum, there are challenges with regards to getting stock built, getting stock repaired, and of course back out the door ready to support the next family that might be needing it. And then on top of that, we're seeing these figures of a quadrupling of the number of women and children escaping domestic and family violence presenting for housing solutions. That's why we continue to invest heavily in this space. Last year we invested $34.7 million to 47 funded organisations to deliver 59 specialist homelessness services across Queensland, and that continues in this year's budget. These services provide temporary supported accommodation and other supported services to women and children experiencing domestic and family violence. When people experiencing domestic and family violence present to our housing service centres or in contact with housing by other means, we respond immediately on that day to ensure that people are safe. Of course, the longer term housing solutions are things that we all work together as part of the strands of the weave that we're trying to create here. Social housing is not always the solution. Sometimes it's other products that we utilise as well. And as you well know, you're working in this sector, we utilise everything from rental subsidy schemes to rental grants, bond loans, lots of different products to be able to support people wherever they might be in terms of their need. For some women, like in my experience, when my marriage broke down, I only needed a little bit of help for a little bit of time, and I was able to get that from my family, and I got myself back on my feet at a time that's very different to today. For my children and I, we were able to move on fairly swiftly. But for other families, it might take a much longer time, and so the supports we put around people are incredibly important. I just want to ensure that obviously the Attorney General and the Minister for Prevention of Domestic and Family Violence, who I think you'll hear from via video soon. I think she's in her estimates today. I've got mine tomorrow. Shannon and I work very closely on these issues. We've established the Housing and Domestic Family Violence Roundtable, where we are discussing some of the really challenging issues and trying to find new solutions through our mutual departments to be able to support the work that we are hearing about and hearing solutions around from those lived experiences. On top of that, I want to remind everybody again that in terms of investment, the government has invested a record $2.9 billion in social and affordable housing. I'm currently in the throes of commencing some 7,400 new social and affordable homes over the next few years. Last year we had a target of 727 to commence. We exceeded that at 832, and I'm pushing my department every day to be able to commence more properties as soon as we possibly can. But as I've already said, it takes time to get buildings out of the ground, and we're already feeling the pressures. That's why we've got other schemes underway. Earlier this year, I announced a $14 million Housing Older Women strategy. That strategy came from talking with older women who had lived experience with regards to homelessness. We're looking at new and innovative designs to be able to meet the needs of older women. Including setting up a specialist service for older women who may be at risk of or experiencing homelessness. Just recently, we announced a further $16 million for an immediate housing response package, putting more funding into our specialist homelessness services, especially focusing on women and families. Recognising that that's where the greatest need is right now as we enter in these compounding issues. And of course, we've also established our Help to Home program, where we're looking for 1,000 head leases across Queensland. $40 million has been put aside to be able to get into those markets where we've seen either properties that may have been in Airbnb or short holiday lets or new to market, and try and get those back into the rental market. And we know that the pressures continue to be compounding right across Queensland and Australia, and in fact in other parts of the world. That investment continues to be part of our story, our strand in the weave that we're creating together here in Queensland. I want to congratulate everybody who's organised today's forum, this very important annual forum. I want to congratulate and acknowledge all of you who bring your strands to this weave that we're creating today. And obviously I stand with you in creating the strongest possible weave to support women and families and all Queenslanders who are at risk of or who are experiencing homelessness, but particularly those women who are experiencing domestic and family violence and then as a result experiencing homelessness. I stand with you in all of that and continue to work hard to ensure that, as I said, that Queensland has the strongest possible weave when it comes to managing and supporting all families experiencing homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We just have a special gift for you, and I've got Shawnee. Shawnee, can you bring two over, would you mind? For all our speakers today, just to let you know, we've got the Lady Musgrave candle, and that is obviously to shine a light on the issues that we are addressing, but also the little bags that are holding the candles. Now, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about them. They're made with care by the low-risk women's prisoners at Helena Jones Centre. Now, it's a low-security women's correctional facility, and it's located in Albion. The jail does things a little differently there with some incredible results. For a start, the women are housed in home-style accommodation. They're encouraged to work 8-hour days on community service projects. They receive counselling and other programs that help with integration and rehabilitation. So the focus is on building life skills, self-esteem and confidence. So the gift bags are one of the many sewing products that these women are producing. And I believe we have in the audience today Superintendent Megan Crossley is joining us, and she's from Helena Jones Centre. So thank you, and thank you to the ladies and all their hard work. And that is a little story behind our gifts for our speakers today. All right, let's get on with our first presentation. presentation. Where are we now and how did we get there? So we are setting the scene. The presentation will cover Women's Safety and Justice Task Force, the call for change, the role of the sector, and why it has happened now. Now, unfortunately, as you just heard, the Honourable Minister Shannon Fentiman, Attorney General and Minister for Justice, Minister for Women and Minister for Prevention of Domestic Family Violence was unable to join us today due to work commitments, but she has sent us this video message.
Can I begin today by respectfully acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm coming to you from today, the Turrbal and Yagara peoples, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to particularly acknowledge the role of First Nations women who have for 3,000 generations provided wisdom, leadership and protection of two of the world's oldest continuing living cultures in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture. Can I also acknowledge the wonderful team from the Lady Musgrave Trust and CEO Victoria Parker. Thank you for bringing us all together for this very important annual forum on women and homelessness. Sadly, domestic and family violence remains one of the leading causes of homelessness in Queensland. Women and children who have experienced violence in their homes deserve safe, stable, long-term accommodation options to support their recovery. Minister Leeanne, Enoch and I are committed to working together to improve the collaboration between the domestic and family violence system and the housing system. But we know we couldn't achieve anything without the wonderful support and the hard work of our community services. So to all of those in the room today, thank you for the work that you do. When the Premier and I established the independent Women's Safety and Justice Task Force led by Margaret McMurdo, we asked the task force to examine women's experiences across the criminal justice system and how best to criminalise coercive control. I understand coercive control will be a key theme of your discussion today, and I look forward to working with all of you to make sure that in the future, coercive control is a crime and that perpetrators are held to account. I was also proud to announce with the Premier that we will implement all of the 89 recommendations from the first Task Force report, and we've committed $363 million to undertake this important work. We're expanding specialist courts and high-risk teams, creating a special strategy for First Nations communities and increasing investments in perpetrator programs. And thanks in part to the ongoing advocacy from Sue and Lloyd Clarke and others, we will legislate to criminalise coercive control. Implementation is now well underway on these recommendations, including new legislative reforms to be introduced into Parliament within months. The task force has also now released its final report on women and girls' experiences across the criminal justice system. It's a very comprehensive report, 188 recommendations, and it has flagged tackling insecure and unsafe housing and homelessness as a key priority to improve the experiences of women and girls. The Queensland Government is now carefully considering these recommendations and will release a government response in coming months. But again, thank you for everything you do, for your contribution to our task force and the work that you do on the ground every day. Thank you to Lady Musgrave Trust for bringing us together. And I congratulate the Trust, Small Steps for Hannah, on your wonderful partnership to update and enhance the Handy Guide. All the very best for today's discussions.
And thank you to our Minister. We can give her a round of applause. Now, she did mention our next speakers, and I would like to introduce them to you now. Sue and Lloyd Clarke have experienced firsthand a flaw in our system to protect women and children. Now, just over 2 years ago, Sue and Lloyd lost their daughter Hannah and their 3 grandchildren to the most horrific act of domestic violence, which made headlines all over the world, but happened right here in our own backyard. To ensure that other families don't have to experience their tragedy, these 2 strong, caring parents started their own foundation, Small Steps for Hannah. And the Lady Musgrave Trust have partnered with 4 Steps for Hannah, strengthening their fight. Would you please welcome Sue and Lloyd Clarke.
Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. And I extend that respect to all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people here today. And a special welcome to all you that have come today to this forum, all the special guests. Thanks again for being here.
Everyone's aware of how our story started, but we weren't aware of coercive control. We weren't aware it had a name. We saw the consequences, we saw the damage it did. He had a whole toolkit of devices he would use on Hannah, and we would see how it would affect her mentally and affect her life so badly. But we didn't know it had a name, coercive control. So we got together and we thought, well, who else doesn't know this, doesn't understand all these things? We didn't. We didn't think we were that naive. Clearly we were. And so we wanted to start the conversation, get everyone to understand what coercive control was. And we also wanted it to be made law if we could. And then we got talking to more people, and we all get together and we make a big voice, and the government's heard us. And that's a collaboration from everybody. Everyone's gotten together, told the government, this is it, line's been drawn in the sand, something must be done. And they've heard us, which is great. It shows what we can all do. So that was one major thing with us forming our foundation. And our other thing we do is, well, there was many things we wanted to do. You know, everyone wants to change the world and do everything right. But we discovered there's so many other organisations doing such wonderful things. Why reinvent the wheel? And for some reason, we seem to be okay at raising money. So we like to raise the money and then give it to great organisations that are doing great jobs and just help improve everything. So I'll now pass over to Lloyd.
So like Sue said, back in, it would have been would have been January 2021. We'd only been going just 12 months. Our world was still in a spin. We were still quite foggy. Weren't really sure what we were doing. But the Domestic Family Violence Prevention Council, they were in touch with us pretty well straight away. And we had some wonderful meetings with them. They introduced us to other organisations, and from there, basically, we had network meetings, coercive control network meetings, because we wanted to learn more about coercive control. So under the guidance of Brad Chilcott from White Ribbon and Leeanne Townsley, who was also with the Family Violence Prevention Council back then, they organised monthly meetings. And we'd go along, and each month there'd be different topics. It would be about the First Nations, or it'd be about all the immigrants. How do they handle it? How do they get through it all? Or it would be about laws. And out of this, it was a great evening. We'd have dinners, but we did that networking, like what's happening here. And I think the more networks we have, or the more forums that we hold, the better it's going to be, and the more information we get. Aren't we all here for that one common thing? To help those needy people. Unfortunately, we find there's a lot of politics involved in foundations. Some get the grants, some don't. So that's why we thought, let's see if we can play the big guy and help out in a small way, just by giving small grants. And over the last 12 months, we have noticed a shift in the government, in policing, and also foundations. We're finding that we are working together. We are getting together and talking. And I think that's what we need to do more of. I was told by a person when we first talked about this, I said, can't we sit down and have a chat? Get all these other foundations together and have a bit of a chat about what they do. I wanted to know, because I wanted to know what they did if I was going to give them grants. And I was told in no uncertain terms, good luck with that. But like I said, with Leeanne and Brad, they did wonders, and we had these monthly coercive control meetings where we started with only 20 people for the first one, and we zoomed in Marsha Scott, who helped get the Scottish laws of coercive control going, and Laura Richards, who got the English laws up and running. They gave us an insight into coercive control and how it all works and what the laws they created over there did. So I'm sure that the Queensland Government has been talking to them, and we'll get the similar ones that is happening in Scotland, because that seems to be working well. They've got the gold standard. And then after that, by the end of probably that 12 months, we're actually turning people away. We had 150 people coming to our dinners. It was a non-for-profit thing. It was just to have a get-together, have a chat, do that networking, and find out what everyone's doing. So I think this is what we need to do, and we need to keep doing more of, is having these conversations. It's an uncomfortable conversation, but I think we've moved. We've got the government moving. We had all these foundations working together and voicing their opinion, so it got the government to say, well, yeah, we've drawn the line in the sand, we have committed, we have said we'll do something, and they have. So by this time next year, hopefully, the coercive controls will nearly be done, the laws will be there, and I think women and children will be a lot safer. And thank you all guys for being here today.
Thank you so much. We do have a little gift for you, so I'll get Shawnee to bring those over. And thank you for sharing your... One each, I know. There you go. Thank you, and for all the work you have done. And as I said, it is all about collaboration, and you've just explained what a difference that has made in only just 12 months, then 2 years. So yes, it's going on, and thank you for your support and your hard work. We'll let you take a seat and enjoy. Can we give them another round of applause, please? Okay, to build on the words of Sue and Lloyd and, of course, Minister Fentiman, the next session, we have the opportunity to ground us in the reason of what we're here today for. So I'd like to invite Britt, where are you, Britt? Yes, from the Content Division, to share with us an experience from a current Lady Musgrave Trust tenant. Now, Britt will read the words... was going to read something word for word, and that's been provided from this very brave tenant. So, Britt, over to you.
Thank you. I have the honour of reading a survivor story today, a local mum of now 2-year-old twins. I never imagined in all my life that I would find myself running out of home without time to even put shoes on my feet, holding my babies and their portable oxygen tanks, and jumping into my friend's car to drive straight to the police station. This was the only way that I was able to safely leave my husband. I had spent over 8 years of my life with the man of my dreams. We travelled the world together, bought our dream home, and after an emotional fertility journey, fell pregnant with twin boys. But behind the Instagram perfect photos, life, our relationship, was far from healthy. My husband was an elite Special Forces soldier, a commando. When I first met this man, I felt so safe and secure in his presence. Over the years, that safe and secure bubble turned into isolation, physical and emotional violence, control, rules I needed to follow, complete financial dependency, yet a smile to the outside world. There were incredibly dark times, yet there were also beautiful moments. Through the darkness, my husband would remind me that I have everything I could ever want, thanks to him. I believed this. When I became pregnant with my twins, I began to see and feel things very differently. It was no longer about me anymore. The decisions in which I would previously make for myself would now affect another vulnerable little person who I know I needed to protect with every part of my being. It wasn't long after finding out that I was pregnant with my twins before there was a violent episode in which I struggled to breathe and was completely powerless under the weight of my husband. After such a heavy impact to the ground and the pain and breathlessness that I felt, I was certain that I would have lost my pregnancy. I bled. I felt such heartbreak. I began to resent this man. How could he do this to his pregnant wife, who he was supposed to protect? I had a checkup. I was still pregnant. My heart was so full. My babies are so strong. I knew that I could not allow for this man to hurt us again. I quickly became unwell in my pregnancy, and it wasn't long until we found out there were complications. Around 24 weeks, I was told the babies were now struggling and we would need to prepare for an early delivery. I held on for as long as I could, then to go on and develop preeclampsia. My beautiful boys were born via emergency cesarean at 26 weeks. They were both incredibly small and fragile, requiring intense and urgent care in the NICU. This was an incredibly terrifying time. I was weak, I was frightened, but I was so in love with my miracle boys. They needed me and I needed them. Not long after I was discharged from hospital, staying close by so I could bring them breast milk every day, my husband and I had an argument. It happened so quickly. I was so weak and recovering from my C-section. I was held down. I could not breathe. I could not move. I was in so much pain. How could this be happening again, like this? I was so scared of what could happen. Then he let me go and he left. My children spent over 150 days in hospital. I spent every day with them. It was the most frightening time of my life, but I was so proud of them, so strong and so brave. They became my biggest motivation to do what I knew I needed to do. I needed to do it for them. I always knew that it was never going to be simple or easy to leave my husband. I felt as though he had an army around him. He had all of the power, the resources, the connections, the finances. His sister was a solicitor. As soon as I had made an indication to his family that things were not good and that I did not feel safe, things quickly changed for the worse. I was made to feel as though I was the cause of all of our issues, that I was a danger to our children. I was the perpetrator and my husband was the victim. I couldn't believe what was happening. I tried to leave with our babies, but it all went wrong. My husband and his family then prevented me from returning to our home, and they wouldn't let me see my babies until I retracted any reference I ever made of my husband being violent. It was a nightmare. They forbid me from seeing my babies for 7 days. I had to drop breast milk over the fence of our home as I was breastfeeding. There are no words to explain the pain that I felt. I knew that I needed to do everything my husband requested of me in order to be allowed to return to our home. I did everything he asked. I was then able to return to our family home. I was not allowed to sleep in a bedroom though. I was to remain downstairs and slept on a couch in the dining and living area. I understood this was all still part of my punishment for trying to leave. I didn't care. I was with my babies. I knew that I needed to be smart this time. I began secretly contacting my mother, and my mum helped to link me with the vulnerable person unit and other services to begin a safety plan for when the time came to leave. I knew it had to be done right next time and that there would be no turning back. I felt like every day I was holding my breath. As I began to link in with services, I was asked lots of questions. During these processes, I began to learn more about the life I was living. I was educated on how serious and life-threatening the abuse I have experienced was. I was told that my situation was incredibly high risk of lethal violence. When asked for more details about incidents that had occurred, things became even more serious. I thought that I would have the opportunity to be incredibly organised when the time came to leave. The day came. I fled with my babies. I had nothing but the clothes we were wearing and their oxygen tanks. But I had my support services. I had a safety plan. This was it. Once I left, my husband removed my access to our joint accounts, our business banking account, and he disconnected my phone. My husband and his family initiated court proceedings in order to try and recover the children from my care, using the same narrative of me being the perpetrator and that I was mentally unstable. There were many lies in the application, which would later come to be proven through subpoena documents and evidence. However, this has not changed the pushback and financial abuse that is still occurring through this process. My supports in the Queensland Police were able to obtain a protection order for the children and I, It was shortly after that my husband was arrested for criminal charges against me. He was held in remand for 10 days and then granted Supreme Court bail. The criminal proceedings are still in motion. Where I was currently staying was not a practical space for the children and I, whilst we safely navigated this chapter of our life. In order to best support the health and well-being of my children and I, we needed to find somewhere that would be close to their medical teams, secure and had surveillance, given the high-risk assessment by multiple organisations and the skill set of my husband. I felt such defeat. I had next to no financial resource. It was not suitable to access social or emergency housing as the baby's medical needs would be compromised. I remember just sitting and crying at night when my babies were asleep. I wanted to be able to give my babies everything they could ever need, and just felt such despair. How did I get here? This isn't the life I ever imagined. I scrolled the internet yet again, looking at all the housing that I knew I just could not possibly afford and that would not be suitable. Then I came across a listing that almost seemed as though it was too good to be true. A secure apartment, close to hospitals and everything we could possibly need. A space with plenty of room for the three of us and the boys' oxygen tanks. It was close to my family supports, and best of all, it was advertised at a reduced price to help provide support. I had to reach out. I was completely overwhelmed with support when I received a phone call from Churches of Christ regarding my inquiry. They genuinely seemed as though they wanted to help me and my boys. I had so many emotions. I started to feel optimistic. I remember feeling conflicted though. Am I really in this situation? I can't be deserving of this type of support. This is for women who have been in really bad situations. This isn't for women like me. I still battle with these conflicting thoughts, but the reality is my babies and I did need support, and I had to accept that so I could provide for them the best I can and be able to move forward. When I was discussing my financial position regarding my application, I started to feel a bit stressed as I knew I was still waiting for my Centrelink to be sorted out. To my complete shock and surprise, I was told that the owners of the property, the Lady Musgrave Trust, were happy to reduce my initial rent price while I sorted out my financials, just because they genuinely wanted to help us. I couldn't believe it. I started to feel confident that I can do this. The stress of having a roof over our head was no longer there. I was able to focus on helping my boys thrive, and that is exactly what I've been able to do here. This space has become so special to me. This is where my boys and I have started our new life together. We have been able to find our own little community with NICU mums close by and the boys' medical team up the road. We've been able to slowly acquire the things we need to fill our home. The support that I've received here has been so overwhelmingly beautiful. When we were moving in, we were asked if there was anything we needed, as they were aware that we fled our home. I'm always being offered support and asked how we are going. I've had support with helping to develop a plan forward and have been able to continue to be supported as that plan evolves and pivots. The opportunity has literally been able to change our lives for the better. I'll never take the opportunity that I have been given for granted. This has truly been a blessing for us to be able to begin our new life and navigate this chapter. I know that my situation in regards to my husband, family court and criminal proceedings are evolving, and it is incredibly important for me to remain vigilant and continue to safety plan as I move forward. I completely believe that being here has been able to help me give the confidence to know that I can do this, and there are people who genuinely want to help. I will forever be grateful for the Lady Musgrave Trust.
Thank you, Brett. Just one of the many heartbreaking stories that the Lady Musgrave Trust have been able to help in their 137 years of operation. Sadly, these numbers aren't diminishing. So forums like today, where we all collaborate, get together and hopefully find solutions. How? Well, we need to find causes, triggers, early signs, and we all need to do our bit. So let's get our first session underway. Sex control and homelessness is the theme. Positively shaping sexual attitudes and behaviours is essential to building respectful relationships. How do unhealthy behaviours begin? And what are the risks if we don't take action? Our speakers are going to explore, what do unhealthy behaviours look like? What are the risks if we don't take action? How do these factors influence the path towards domestic and family violence and homelessness? And what can we do about it? Let's introduce our panel who are going to address all of those topics, starting with Louise Baker. So Young Women, Young Families Manager with Brisbane Youth Service, largest organisation in Brisbane for young people at risk. When I say young, we're talking 12. 13 years of age. Louise is a social worker with 13 years experience in the sector. Cheryl Batchelor, founder of Yilia Pina Indigenous Corporation. I have been practicing. Cheryl is looking into brain health in vulnerable children, youths, adults and seniors. Karen Bradfield, clinical sexologist, education and engagement coordinator, Gold Coast Centre Against Sexual Violence. Karen works with people of all ages, genders and sexualities to discover a greater understanding of themselves, their rights and their individual identity. Hilda Sirik, Commander, Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation, Australian Federal Police. Hilda has had significant exposure to a vast range of victim-based crimes on both a national and international platform. And welcome our panel host, who we had the pleasure of meeting a little earlier, and Professor Melissa Bull. Can I just ask, what have you done? I know you've got your crutches over there. You're hobbling. Oh my goodness, it's teamwork. Nothing stops these ladies, does it? No. Can I ask quickly, what did you do?
I was running the dogs, so I was out for a run. You know, managing stress, getting my life in order. It's where I do my thinking. And I smashed the 5th metatarsal. The doctor said, I thought, I twisted my ankle, I'll just walk it out. The next day I couldn't walk. The scans showed I broke the top off it. There were a few bits and what the doctor called bone dust and a spiral fracture.
Oh my goodness. All right, and can I just quickly ask what happened here?
Well, yours is far more noble than mine. I turned golf into a contact sport. So literally walking off a path and fell over, and I've detached a ligament, torn another couple too, and who knows, the doctor said I've done something messy on the inside that an MRI is needed. So yeah, precaution, we'll see how we go.
What a team. See, nothing stops them. All right. Now, we will get our panel underway. Also, just quickly, the Centre for Justice is our event sponsor here today, and they have sponsored the catering, which we will enjoy very shortly. So thank you for your wonderful support. We do have a lady on the side. Erin is going to be our timer. Just to try and keep it, we need to keep it moving. She does work with Queensland Police, just letting you know. So you may be arrested if you go over time. No, she's with Public Affairs. So let's get underway, Melissa. It's over to you.
So in 2020, Lady Musgrave Trust started talking to people and organisations about thinking about ways to improve access by women in crisis to their handy guide by moving it online, which is a great advance. Their focus was on not just on developing the guide and shifting it online, but also, besides it being more accessible, they wanted to provide some information in relation to family and domestic violence. So they spoke to individual women, women's services, organisations, employers, representing employers, workers, families and children, school, disability, police, people with lived experience, people who had recently arrived, women who'd recently arrived in the community to develop this. And so this broad selection of stakeholders helped Lady Musgrave to understand what information was most valuable to women when they experienced domestic and family violence, and what information and services needed to be shared through the guide. But there was one theme, there was one consistent message that well, there was a number, but one of them that was of concern to almost everyone they spoke to was access to pornography. And, you know, I've been given some really useful notes here, but I think about this. Last century, when I started my career, I worked for the Institute of Criminology, and I did a project around regulating the sex industry, and my task was to think about how to regulate pornography. Pornography then was in magazines and videos, and the Australian Censorship Board used to look at everything, but enter the internet, and there's been a transformation. It's easy, it's fast, it's cheap, it's borderless, it's abundant, it's unlimited, unregulated and private. And so that presents challenges, particularly in relation to young people. The young age of initial access, especially by boys, to content that's violent and controlling, content that represents women in submissive stereotypes and promotes highly sexual, highly risky practices, contributes to feeding unrealistic and even illegal expectations of many young people long before they enter into relationships. So it shapes the way they think about intimacy and the way they think about relationships. This increased access to pornography impacts on their attitudes and expectations as they enter relationships, and particularly around their attitudes and expectations around entitlement and the important matter of consent. This then leads into the development of acceptance to coercive behaviours, and this is confirmed by a great report by Our Watch, which demonstrates the link between the availability of pornography and violence towards women. So just to give you some figures from that report, it identified that nearly half, 48% of young men have seen pornography by the age of 13 and 48% of young women by 15. And on average, young men are viewing pornography for the first time 3 years before they get into their first sexual relationship. So that's where they learn about, well, what they might think of as intimacy. So contributors to the research conducted by the Lady Musgrave Trust identified this as a problem, but also the extreme gender stereotyping within pornography as incredibly problematic. So in this context, we see sexting, self-made videos of sex or intimate images, and then that leads to consequential revenge porn actions and issues that disproportionately impact in very negative and damaging ways on young people and young women in particular. And these are linked to this early and wide access to pornography. The gendered nature of domestic and family violence needs no explanation, and we've already heard, you know, heart-breaking stories in relation to that. Neither does the increased prominence being given by media to issues of continued male dominance and attitudes of entitlement. I think of the tidal wave of the Me Too movement, which spread across the globe almost overnight, and the examples that are played out in our own national capital. So I guess many of you, I've been talking a lot about gender violence and I've been talking a lot about sex and pornography, so you might be thinking, okay, you know, I get the sex control thing, but what's it got to do with homelessness? You know, until we address some of these really deep undercurrents in our community, we'll never really understand why, after the promise of the second wave of feminism, where we optimistically thought everything would change, why we still live in a society where women and men are not equal. And whilst ever this is the case, women will disproportionately find themselves in controlling relationships And as we heard in that really heart-wrenching story of lived experience, the price is leaving and homelessness. So that's why we have this panel, and we're going to look deeper into this issue with our terrific panellists here. So I might start with Karen. Can you tell us a bit briefly about your experience of how pornography impacts relationship and ultimately leads to homelessness?
So I guess in the Gold Coast Centre Against Sexual Violence, we work with young women from 14 years and up. So we're really seeing a lot of young women in the early years of high school presenting and identifying with a much more adult service in relation to much more adult experiences of sexual violence. So I think that's been a really big shift over the last 5 to 10 years of what we've seen in the service there. But in terms of pornography, I guess firstly it's important to acknowledge that Moira Carmody really puts forward the premise that there are lots of people who don't equate intimacy with violence that do watch pornography. So we're looking at a subset of people that already have attitudes that are disrespectful, that represent inequality, that are supportive of violence against women and align closely with those gendered drivers of gender-based violence, that then are watching pornography and being emboldened and entitled in those pre-existing attitudes and beliefs. So when we look at younger people and children who may still be forming those attitudes, a lot of those contextual factors also come into play. So the absence of solid role models through that search of identity in quite developmental years. It can be the complete lack of sexuality education, the lack of discussions around sexuality and sex as pleasure-based, as equal, as mutual. So all of those things are really missing, that then allows pornography to become the loudest voice in the room. That really gives pornography a platform to speak to young people in those really formative years of sexual identity and sexual scripts, with the absence of any other information. And so what we do see is that those attitudes become emboldened, that there's kind of a dual or multi-directional relationship between having violent supportive attitudes, watching pornography becoming more and more disrespectful, violent, reinforcing those disrespectful attitudes, and this kind of back and forth relationship that's really impacting particularly cisgendered heterosexual men in that space. And remember that pornography is a really big, broad kind of melting pot of different forms of things. But certainly, when we talk about holding perpetrators to account and really looking at where some of those attitudes and values come from, they start early, and then pornography plays a role in the further development and entitlement that really stems from that experience. I guess in terms of our work with survivors and what we see in that space is, as I said, certainly identification with more adult experiences at a much younger age. We're definitely seeing much more difficulty naming an experience as sexual violence. So this real confusion around where that line is, what actually is enthusiastic consent. I didn't say no. Yeah, but you didn't say hell yes either. So there's this real complication that pornography certainly plays a role in, is it does have a very predictable and homogenous script where anything from no to violence is met with pleasure or at best a neutral response from the recipient of that violence. And so when people are kind of soaked in that narrative and that sexual script, it becomes increasingly difficult for them to reflect on their own experience, and that's whether it's sexual violence or more broadly looking at intimate partner violence, and really put a name to that experience. Or as we heard in the survivor experience before that was read out, of this comparison of mine wasn't that bad, or it wasn't as bad as, I don't really qualify for accessing a service or for being able to speak out about this. Instead of having, as I said, those pleasure-based conversations where actually any violation of our boundary, any crossing of our consent or our limitation should actually be viewed and be able to be named as something that was non-consensual, that was a form of violence and harm. But there is an increasing difficulty with people of all ages, but I guess for this upcoming generation who their entire developmental experience has been influenced by pornography, but by social media and sexualised media more broadly as well. You know, society in general is much more sexualised, there's much more discussion of that. And I guess increasingly what we're seeing too is the kind of commodification of female pleasure for male pleasure, and so there's a confusion around that as well for young women presenting at our service around, was it for their pleasure, were they kind of going along with something because that's sort of what you do, and again reinforced by TikTok, by Instagram, by all those other forms of media that have something to say to young people that actually should be trusted adults saying it, but we don't say it, we don't provide it as a form of education, we just aren't counterbalancing a lot of those discussions for young people. You know, it's not pornography's fault that it's become the default sexuality educator, and it's not young people's fault that really the only source of quality sexuality education, and I say quality in inverted commas, is pornography and the online world. Like, there just aren't better options. So I guess that's sort of the context around the pornography and the attitudes and values. And in terms of that link to homelessness, it's really, sexual violence is both a cause and a consequence of sexual violence, that it's the bit that sits in the middle. So for young women who have experiences of intimate partner sexual violence, who have had childhood sexual abuse happen or be perpetrated in their home, or sexual violence perpetrated by someone that they live with, that is a very real cause and linkage to sleeping rough, being at risk of homelessness, of moving into unsafe transitional and share housing. And those forms of accommodation that really lack that safety are then in and of themselves a cause of further experiences of victimisation and sexual violence. That's kind of the mediating thing, is it's the housing, and you know, that is the theme of today, is the thing that really underpins it. And when we look at Maslow's hierarchy and kind of go, right, well, it's about shelter, it's not about shelter, because there's a really big difference between a house and a home. And when we want to move up that hierarchy of needs and make sure that people are really safe, they need the security and stability of long-term accommodation that allows them to plan for the future, to build a home, to build a life, not just have somewhere dry to sleep that night, which certainly is a priority and not to be overlooked, but it's what's next, what comes next. And for people who are survivors of sexual violence, a lot of those housing options that are available to people who experience domestic and family violence aren't accessible through that pathway. It's actually not eligible for refuge and a lot of those other options, particularly if you have left an experience of domestic violence and then perhaps couch surfed and then experience sexual violence, you actually are cut off from all of those other housing options, because the predominant reason that you're then seeking it is not the domestic violence, it's the sexual violence. So there's a real gap in that, because we know that vulnerability is intersectional, and so all of those things kind of just form this quite complex melting pot that pornography is a part of, but we need to look at that broader picture as well.
Thank you so much. It really gives us insight into how complex this minefield is, but also it gives us insight into, it starts to give us some insight into the roles that laws and policies have in enabling us to respond, and how the problem's framed. I mean, I think that's quite interesting, that they escape from one thing, end up couch surfing, are vulnerable to something else, which means that they can't. So maybe we could turn to you, Hilda, and you could give us a bit of insight into the situation regarding explicit material and the current state of play, and perhaps the normalisation of that type of activity. OnlyFans? I had to actually find out what that was, but I just didn't know that it had a name. And how that leads to women and children becoming more vulnerable.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the invitation to speak. I suppose to start off with, so I get to work at the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation, which has been a collaborative centre put together to combat online exploitation. And to start off the conversation, for us, words really matter in respect of protection of children. So we don't term child pornography at all. Pornography and exploitive images that relate to children gives a certain level of complicity towards it. So we call it abuse material or exploitation material. And that's a really critical factor because a child can't consent to have their exploited material being procured, produced, and then disseminated online. When we talk about the prevalence of it, and I'll just go through a few stats, is that in the last year we received over 36,000 reports from the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children of referrals into Australia of children being exploited either online or here in Australia. So those reports reference probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of potential victims here in Australia and around the world. So looking at the prevalence and the number of reports that we get in, this is where we start to get to realise that there's a large population out there that is normalising child abuse material. And when we look at that as well, our notion of who is a child sex offender is drastically changing due to the prevalence of the images online and the internet and their access to pornography as well. So once upon a time, your notion of a child sex abuser was, a white older male in their 40s to 60s, and that was what we kind of sort of had a sense of. Now we're seeing offenders as young as 19 accessing children here in Australia, getting, engaging in relationships with women who have children so that they can get access to their children as well. So this cycle of, the why, where are they getting these sort of inclinations from is a really critical factor. What we started to identify is that on the internet, every 7 minutes a web page shows an abuse of a child around the world. I mean, if you just look at those facts, I mean, that's just startling. I mean, the internet's there meant to be, good for us, to connect us around the world, to give us information, to give us those privacy requirements and access to information, and it does all that. But it also creates a very big schism in the vulnerabilities of women and children out there. So moving towards what we understand around the use of the internet around the world. So approximately 62% of the world has access to the internet. So that's around 4.8 billion people access the internet last month. So, and this is growing at an annual rate of 4.8%, with more than 600,000 new users every day. 1 in 3 children are internet users, and of those 1 in 3 children, 1 in 5 are sexually solicited while online. So what does that mean for us now and into the future? We know that if we have statistics about at least 1 in 5 children that happen to be as those 1 in 3 users, they are going to grow up as victims. They're going to grow up in a vulnerable set of circumstances, which leads them to be able to be victimised for other crimes into the future. We know that from the trends online and the reports that are coming into the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation, that children are self-generating exploitation material. This whole hypersexuality of the generations, the desensitisation about what's appropriate and what you send online, the competition that we see driven through social media is driving children and young people to generate their own exploitive material. And then if that's not enough, we have offenders out there that are taking advantage and trying to extort even more images or extort them for financial gain. Excuse me. And then what we're also seeing is that when we are talking to our offenders that are being investigated and prosecuted for this, their conversations often quite start with, well, I started looking at pornography and then I started to get bored with that, so I started to look at other aspects of pornography, something that's more risky. And then because of the prevalence of online exploitation, there's not too many clicks away to being able to have access to child abuse material. So it's just this victim cycle that they are perpetuating themselves into, saying that it's the internet's fault and that, they're getting bored with the sexualised pornography that's in front of them. The work that we have to do, though, is the partnership and the community engagement about what is acceptable online, how we can protect our children to getting away from those vulnerabilities online, but also working with tech companies to start taking down all these child abuse materials. And I'm saying there's millions of images and videos out there, and it's not hard to access that for anyone that is looking for pornography online. That connectivity between pornography and child abuse material is a slope that a lot of our offenders are going down. But we also know that our artificial intelligence that's being scraped along the internet isn't removing this content sufficiently enough to be able to then leave the consented adults pornography online. So the tech companies are just not going to be able to do it all. So it takes humans, it takes efforts, it takes us to find different ways. You mentioned OnlyFans. I mean, certainly those websites and dating websites where we have potential offenders accessing vulnerable parts of the community, women on dating sites. You know, we've seen matters where some of our offenders have gone out to women on social media and said, you can't, women with only children need to apply. That type of scenario. So we're really carefully calibrating what we do to respond against all those social media aspects. And I had my time delay, so I'll leave it there.
Okay, so we might just move on. There's lots of other questions I'd like to ask you, Hilda, but maybe we can talk about that later and during the break. But importantly, Louise, the figures about the early age of entry into the world of pornography are startling. You know, I think of my neighbours and the children that live around me, and they're in that age bracket. What do you learn from young people using your service about pornography's impact and the pressures they are under to access it? And how do you think that links to homelessness?
So we work with a particularly vulnerable cohort. So, you know, our youth are at risk or are homeless or at risk of homelessness. So our population is particularly vulnerable. Approximately 73% of our young people are disclosing that they have experienced family violence. So, and about 23% of them are actually disclosing that they're using family violence. So that is deeply staggering and likely to be an under-report, given it's a self-report. So, you know, our cohort are incredibly vulnerable in that regard. A huge number of our young women are reporting strangulation as a part of consensual, intimate partner relations. And it's interesting with our young people, it's very much around language. If you ask one of our young people if they've been sexually assaulted within the context of their intimate partner relationship, they will invariably say that they haven't. But then if you change the question and use different language and ask them about whether they've ever been made to perform an act that made them uncomfortable or that felt scary or dangerous, that's when we'll get the disclosures around strangulation. And invariably that is described as terrifying for them and not something that they're consenting to, not that you even legally can. But, you know, so this is just the normalisation of violence for our young people. They have generally grown up with family violence in their family of origin. They are generally experiencing violence in their intimate partner relationships, and a whole cohort of them are actually using violence. So really disturbing stats for us, and we felt that we were absolutely compelled to start to find ways to address this.
Thank you. It is staggering that that type of behaviour is linked to pleasure or, you know, imagined in that way. And I guess that's sort of linked to how our brains develop and how we understand or create meaning for ourselves, and then how that that contributes to how we experience things as pleasurable, which is linked to our brain. And I've had the pleasure of being on panels and working with Cheryl over the last couple of years, so I'm really keen to hear her views. So we see the impacts of this when it comes to violence and homelessness, but what's happening in the brain?
There's a couple of things. I think the biggest thing is that childhood adversity rewires the brain. And the Adverse Childhood Experiences study is the evidence behind that, and that's done around the world. And I think we often forget about that actually starts preconception right across the lifespan. And so it's this decrease in brain health that all the behaviours that we're hearing about today is a response to that. And what we're not doing is actually addressing that decrease in brain health, where the chemistry and architecture of the brain is changed moment by moment through those experiences. That's the part that's missing. And then add on to that, for our Indigenous space, the decrease in brain health because of colonisation is still impacting us today in multiple different ways. And you can see that when you go into remote Indigenous communities, where the way that men and women law is, L-O-R-E, is still experienced. That people are still trying to do the things that they did 10 to 20 years ago, but now things have changed and now they have to find a new way of working and a new way of relationship building. And that's really confusing. That can be very, very confusing as time goes on. So there's a couple of things, is that the good thing from this is the power of neuroplasticity. And I've been very fortunate enough to learn from well neuroscientists that we can change the brain no matter where in the lifespan that you are. But the thing is that there's certain critical times, and it does really concern me about the 10 to 14 age group that are engaging in these behaviours, because that's when neuroplasticity is like a sponge at that particular time. So that's actually the time that we can make the most difference, the most difference. But it doesn't happen within schools. We can't keep wanting our schools to do things. And as our minister said before, it's about the weave. Which part of the weave and which part of the thread are we going to be a part of? The other thing with this is that because it changes the brains, it changes the chemistry of the good chemicals like dopamine, serotonin, all those things, so that the brain craves it. So all the behaviours that we're hearing about the increase, it's no wonder. It's because the chemistry is craving that. Now, in regards to trauma, is that if you have been through some sort of physical or emotional or whatever abuse when you were growing up, your brain will seek out adventures to keep going back to that, because it wants to relive it so it can change the neurobiology of it. So the biggest thing with this decrease in brain health is one is really explicitly teaching it in the workforce. Because in one sense, our brains, in one way, are contributing to some of the problems that we have in society, because we're not recognising where our brain health is. And as we go across the lifespan, from 40, for men, we have a decrease in testosterone. And that has an impact on our social skills and our depression, our anxiety, and how that relates to our ego and how we work in our workforce. So if that decrease in testosterone happens very quickly, that changes our chemistry in our brain, and it changes the way that we live and respond to our relationships. Now, people don't think about that, but it's actually a real true thing that happens. And the same with menopause. We know perimenopause happens 10 years before we sort of like start seeing menopause symptoms. That changes the brain. It changes the brain. Going through menopause changes the brain. So we're wanting things to keep going the same throughout our life, but our brains keep changing all the time because of our experiences during the day. But as I said before, there's power of neuroplasticity and learning about the brain in the workforce as well as everywhere else, and allowing young people to practice what they've learnt. So this is the other thing that really concerns me, is that there's wonderful programs out there for interventions that might go for 6 weeks or 10 weeks. That's not enough. It is not enough to make a neurochemistry and architectural change to the brain. It just won't cut it. The second thing is that where do you practice those skills? Where's the opportunity to practice those skills? And then the third thing is, do they have the neurocognition to actually apply what they've learnt? How is their working memory? How is their cognitive flexibility? How is their inhibition control? Because their overall brain health, they can't apply what they've learnt, we're not going to change anything. So brain health matters for everyone.
Thank you, Cheryl. I always find your input so interesting, and I'm going to be optimistic there that the brain is plastic, or there is that neuroplasticity. There's hope for our children, but there's hope for us too. So, just to finish...
Yeah, well, I was going to say we do have time for... a question. Is that okay? Do you want to...
Well, I was just going to ask, what do you think we need to do? Like, what's urgent? This is to all the panellists.
So you're saying if they had a magic wand and anything at all was possible now, what would you do?
Yeah.
I would screen for brain health. That's my number one thing. Very, very early onset screen for brain health. We should be doing that in schools. And we can do that in schools. It's all online now. It doesn't take long for us to do that. So that's one of the big things that I'm advocating for. We should also be screening for brain health in our youth justice system. Every time we have a young person or anyone that's not functioning, test for that. We know even dementia starts 10 years beforehand. So I'm not saying that some of our people have dementia, but what I'm saying is that decrease in cognition, which we can screen for, is number one.
Good.
I'm going to piggyback off that, Cheryl. I just think that, early intervention, we know which populations and cohorts are at risk. We've identified them. We know why they're at risk. And we have the solutions. We just need the will and the interventions to be rolled out and to target early and, with rigour.
Hilda, do you have something?
Absolutely, thank you. I'm going to go with different tact, and I'm going to focus on the internet, and that is for everyone to actually really know what our children are doing online. Life is synonymous with being online. We're not going to get away from that. I mean, research that we've done says only 52% of parents and carers actually know about online safety and what their children are doing online. 20% think it's too horrendous to talk about online exploitation. We're having children groomed whilst they're sitting at the dinner table with their devices. So I just ask your kids, your grandparents, your aunties, uncles, whatever, instead of asking them how their day went today, ask them how their online day went. And let's bring it into the vernacular that we need to know what's happening online.
Okay, and finally, Karen?
Just to hold perpetrators to account. I think we know that most of them are serial offenders, have multiple victims, so the sooner we can interrupt that pattern and hold them to account, the better the outcome will be.
So listening to that, I find it really interesting, and the message I would have is, yes, we need sustained intervention. Too often programs are pilots. We know what to do, we need sustained intervention.
Mm-hmm. That's it. We're out of time. But what a fantastic way to start. Can you please give all of our speakers a nice big round of applause?
Good morning, everyone. And before I begin, I too would also just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on. And on behalf of myself and my team here present, just pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I would also just like to extend my deepest thanks to Victoria and the Lady Musgrave Trust for inviting me to speak and share my experience as a young person working in primary prevention of domestic violence. Again, it's a huge privilege to be here amongst some amazing, very experienced individuals and experts in our field. My role as a program manager at YFS involves overseeing for Respect, Alpha Respect is a peer-to-peer education program, and we deliver education workshops in schools and in community to empower young people with the tools and the knowledge to have healthy relationships and prevent DV before it occurs. Alpha Respect was established in 2015 by YFS in Logan after there was an identified need for more primary prevention work. Since starting, we have engaged with more than 600,000 young people across Logan and surrounds, and that's both face-to-face and online. An evaluation by our program in 2017 revealed that our model was successful in impacting young people's attitudes and creating an attitude shift. However, as we know, young men's attitudes and behaviours towards women remained incredibly difficult to shift. So in response to this, we have developed a suite of programs to cater to the diverse needs of young people, including young men, specifically young women, culturally and linguistically diverse young people, and gender diverse people as well. However, as we all know, there's an increasing demand on our services, but not an increase in capacity and funding, which has been one of our biggest hurdles as a program. We've worked actively to combat the very attitudes and behaviours that drive DV. In my 7 years of working in this space, first beginning as an 18-year-old, we've had many young people disclose intergenerational trauma and their own experiences with DV, whilst also begging for more work to be done in the space. I want to share one experience that has stuck with me in my line of work. Following one of our very first workshops at a school, in a Logan partnered school, a young man who sat in on one of our sessions had passed on an email, had asked his teacher to pass on an email to the team, and the email read that he was incredibly thankful for the team speaking to him, and through our workshop he came to the realisation that what him and his mum were experiencing at home was domestic and family violence. This encouraged him to later actually sit down with his mum and have a conversation about what was happening, and encourage her to seek assistance and validate her experience. In this moment, we were able to plant a seed in a young person's mind and give him the power to break the cycle of violence. The issues that young people are facing in relation to DFV are incredibly complex, and this directly impacts the safety of women and girls. Many young girls we see in our workshops have no idea that consent can be taken back at any time, that they have a right to bodily autonomy and a right to say no. No idea that sex and compliance is expected and normal in a relationship. In contrast to this, many of the young men we see struggle to understand consent when it isn't modelled at home. They struggle with respecting boundaries, having empathy for women and girls, and regulating their own emotions. On top of that, young people are still coming to terms with their own trauma from intergenerational family violence. And sometimes when both home and school isn't a safe space, we are that safe space. It's clear to me that young people need access to inclusive, comprehensive, respectful relationships education, and young women need culturally safe spaces to learn about sex, to learn about consent and gender roles. We are incredibly lucky to have the support of our parental organisation YFS and our CEO Kath, who have given young people like me a chance to lead, a chance to co-design a nationally award-winning program. I believe that respectful relationships education deserves to be a priority focus, and it deserves funding and proper implementation, because young people deserve this. When young people are empowered, we can be agents of change, not agents to be changed. Thank you.
Well, we've certainly got the conversation started. I could hear you all asking questions and already giving feedback and ideas on what we've heard so far. Hey, but there is more to come, so get ready. One of the many ways the Lady Musgrave Trust helps women facing homelessness and needing help is, of course, with their Handy Guide. And we're going to launch that now. And the Handy Guide is actually an online portal developed with Small Steps for Hannah to provide enhanced domestic and family violence content as well. There is also available hard copies, and in the past it's always been hard copies. Obviously going online is giving this access to a lot more people, and remembering it's free. So please let it do its job, and the only way it can do its job is for us to spread the word and make sure it gets out there in the hands of anyone and everyone. So to get the launch underway, would you please welcome back Sue and Lloyd Clarke from Small Steps for Hannah, and Louise Kelly is the president of the Lady Musgrave Trust.
Thank you, everyone. This has been a very exciting and innovative, I suppose, project. I'll just give you a short story on it. It sort of fell into Small Steps' lap. Our board chairman decided he would go to and check out Lady Musgrave, their way they ran their board meetings, because they were such an old foundation. So he sat in on a board meeting, and just happened to be the time when they were talking about the Handy Guide. So conversations were started, and basically he said, yeah, we're here to help if we can, and brought it back to our board, and we looked at the idea and thought, well, this is great. You know, the more help women and children get out there, looked at the background, looked at that you were doing work for homeless women, but then we all realised that most of these homeless women are involved with domestic violence. That's why they leave their homes. That's why they're homeless. They're left with nothing, they need to move on. And we thought, this is a great gift for people, easy, they can find it. Everyone has phones these days. So we thought, yeah, okay, let's help out whatever we can. And so that's what we basically did, out of just popping in to see how their membership or their boards run. We became friends, and we've been included in the conversation and in the planning of this. So we hope we've helped and given some information that is relevant and for the DV sector. And yeah, I'd just like to thank them for inviting us and letting us join in.
To have something like this when Hannah was wanting to leave would have been so helpful for her. She didn't know where to go, she didn't know where to look, she didn't know what to do. She eventually went to a police station where she got a lovely police officer who did verify everything she was saying. She felt validated and did agree that it was domestic violence and did give her a number to call. But if she'd had a one-stop shop on the website to get her through, it would have been invaluable. So every little bit we can do to help is just amazing. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, my name's Louise Kelly and I'm the very proud president of the Lady Musgrave Trust. Can you all join me in thanking Lloyd and Sue Clarke again? Not for only, their support of the Lady Musgrave Trust, but just the great work that they've been doing in the community with keeping the conversation around coercive control and to the great work that they're doing with the young people. So I really want to thank you for that. I've got a lovely job today. I just get to thank people, and as we're launching our online handy guide, we are so incredibly proud to be able to be here today. So on behalf of the Lady Musgrave Trust, I'd like to sincerely thank Sue and Lloyd Clarke, the Small Steps for Hannah Foundation, and the Queensland Community Foundation for their very generous contribution towards making our online handy guide a reality. We wouldn't have been able to produce the quality of work that we've been able to do if it hadn't been for your support. And it's been a real snowballing effect for us as an organisation. And because of this, we've got some other projects happening that will make women safer. So that's really important. For many years, we've printed the handy guide and distributed it throughout Queensland free of charge. And I think Vic mentioned 220,000 handy guides have been placed into the hands of women who need that information. And we will continue to do that because the handy guide makes a very important contribution with our community workers and when they're working with women at risk of homelessness. And I think it's called the Purple Book, and we will continue to do that. And it will evolve as our online portal evolves as well. So to supplement this, we are able to launch now our online handy guide. It has the capacity to reach women when they most need it at any time, and this will also make women safer. The online handy guide has been a labour of love for many, many people. And I'd like to acknowledge Caroline Reid, who is our previous CEO of the Lady Musgrave Trust, who developed the idea for this and worked hard in getting financial support. When Karen retired at the beginning of this year, we knew we had to find a very special person to take this project and make it sing. And we were very, very blessed to have Victoria Parker join our team as the CEO of the Lady Musgrave Trust. And she's had many sleepless nights and has networked her little heart out and has really done an amazing job, and I'd like to acknowledge that today too. I'd also like to acknowledge the great work you've done today with the forum. It's just been an amazing day, and the venue is brilliant, and I thank QUT and the Centre of Justice for their sponsorship of today. I'd also like to thank Rachael Watson and Jenny Clarke. Jenny is on our board of directors of the Lady Musgrave Trust for the many hours of research that went into developing the online handy guide. Jenny and Rachael have spoken to so many organisations and so many end users of our handy guide, and it's because of this work, and many of the organisations are here today. We've been able to develop a website based on your feedback and opinions. I'd also like to thank Britt and Tessa and Kurt from the Content Division. They are an amazing organisation. They've seen this vision through for us and developed an incredible website, and they've been amazing partners, and we're very grateful for your support along the way. But our work isn't over yet. We plan to improve and fine-tune this website. So you are the people we need to hear from. So if you have any recommendations, please let us know, because we want this to be the premium resource for women who are in crisis. So our next challenge is to make sure that the women who need to know about the online handy guide can know where it is. We can have the best website in the world, but if people don't know about it, it's of no use. So we are very grateful to Simone Waugh from Publicists Worldwide and Kelly Burnham from Starcom for helping us get the word out. And we are launching an incredible campaign within the next month or so. So I really ask for you to keep an eye out for that and to spread the word as well. Publicists and Starcom have, I said earlier today, have been treating us like we are a multi-million-dollar client, and they've done everything completely pro bono for us. And that is the vibe around Queensland, is that we want to see action and we want to see change, and I can't thank them enough. The campaign to let women know about the online handy guide will be launching next month, as I mentioned before. So the website will provide knowledge and with it power to the women who had previously thought they had lost their power and had nowhere to go. So it's my pleasure to officially launch our online handy guide. Please feel free to have a look at the www.thehandyguide, creativelytitled.com.au. So it's my pleasure to officially launch this with a very powerful video that publicists have developed for us. So I thank you again for your support of the Lady Musgrave Trust, and I thank you for coming along here today and keeping that conversation going. So thank you.
Hey, it's me. We haven't seen you in ages. Let's catch up soon. Hi, darling. Just checking in. Call me back.
Yeah, I just got home. Where are you?
Hey, Mum. Dad's acting funny again. Can you come home?
Hey, love, it's me. We'd love to see you. Why don't you and the kids come and see us for a bit?
I haven't heard from you, darling. Please give me a call, will you? Okay. It's Mum.
Hey, just spoke to Mum. Everyone's a bit just worried. Reckon I could come over later?
If you feel stuck in a dangerous relationship, there's one place you can go. The online handy guide connects women to the support and services they need to escape domestic violence and find safety.
Hello? Oh, hi, it's Carol. I'm glad you found us because I've got some good news. We've got a home ready for you and the kids. You don't know how much this means to us. I just can't take it.
It was a very powerful video, I totally agree. From nowhere to go to nowhere to go. And that's the first thing we can help, at least, with getting that book out, the guide out, thehandyguide.com.au. All right, it's time to start looking at solutions. What can we do? So our next session, Making Queensland Safer for Women. What do we need to do to make Queensland the safest state for women? Our panellists are going to be looking at what is being done to improve safety for women and their children, what is the biggest challenges in preventing homelessness, and how can we make a difference? Let's have a look, or let's meet now our wonderful lineup of panellists. We've got Cindy Barden, is the creator of Little Love Bug, or Bug Love. Oh, I'm thinking of the movie, The Love Bug. Little Bug Love. Cindy has lived through domestic violence and has come up with a simple idea that will make a big difference to help our little ones overcome trauma and feel more empowered. Welcome. We've got the Assistant Commissioner, Brian Codd from Queensland Police Service. He leads the Domestic Violence and Vulnerable Persons Command. Thank you for coming. Very brave, Brian. You're a panel of all women up here. Yeah.
Safest place.
Okay. Welcome back to Rachael. Pascua is joining us on our panel. We also have Julie Sarkozy, the Practice Director, Law Reform and Education, Women's Legal Service. In addition to her work at WLS, Julie has an active caseload of Counselling Notes Protect, which is CNP, service clients. CNP provides advice and representation to stop and limit the counselling records of victims of sexual assault to be looked at, read and used in courts. Amanda Shipway, Director, Integrated Service Responses, Office for Women and Violence Protection. Amanda is acutely aware of the housing issues impacting women and children escaping domestic violence and works on a daily basis to ensure an integrated service system response is afforded to women across Queensland. Our panel host for this is Simone Wall, Managing Director of Publicists Worldwide. And Simone was the creator of that very impactful video we just saw. So would you please welcome our team?
Now is the time to get into solution making. What I really want to discuss today are the biggest challenges in preventing homelessness in your worlds. Now, I think from my perspective, I can see all of the momentum happening. The last 5 years, we've seen a lot of reports and recommendations, and it's really overwhelming for me personally to really cut through as to exactly what is happening. We've got the Queensland Women's Strategy report. We've got the Not Now, Not Ever report. It had 140 recommendations. We've got the Domestic and Family Violence Prevention Strategy. We've got the Prevent, Support, Belief Queensland Framework. We've got a task force report of another 89 recommendations. And so I think so you can see it's actually where we're trying to get to is exactly what is happening that is going to make a difference. Also introduced around Queensland, just to reflect on, we've got new specialist DFV courts, we've got new integrated high-risk response service teams, we've got new shelters for women and children popping up everywhere, we've got new women's safety and justice task force. So what I'm going to do is really cut to the chase and actually just ask each of you from your perspective, like, what is the one significant action happening in your world that you believe that will help women in domestic and family violence situations to empower them to live safely and to leave safely from their situation? I'm going to actually throw to you, Cindy, first, because you are incredible what you have done after having your own lived experience and experiencing, I guess, when you left, what happened. Can you tell us, like, why you have created what you've created and, what is the significant action?
Well, the action that we're creating with Little Bug Love is in police stations, and that's comforting our children of domestic violence while they're there. It's distracting them from those adult conversations and that trauma getting deeper and deeper with every statement. My daughter was with me and she was 11 and turning 12 during our experience, and we reported over 1,800 breaches in the first 2 months we were in hiding. And it wasn't until Vic actually asked us to be on this panel that I started to realise that 2 months of hiding wasn't hiding. We were homeless. Like, that's only occurring to me now. Like, I've realised that because I was fighting every day to get back to my home, I didn't realise I was homeless till this year. Just saying, thanks. You're welcome. But do you know what I mean? Like, I didn't, because you live it, you experience it so differently, you don't see it as clearly as everybody else. So the space we're creating not only comforts and distracts those kids from further trauma, it'll stop mum from censoring herself, because I did. There was some things that were sent through to my phone that my daughter will never ever hear, and so the police didn't hear because she was with me. So by being able to just comfort and distract these children and put them in headphones on a tablet, we're giving mum more room to not censor herself, to disclose. We're making it easier for the police to do their job, get them in, get those statements and get them out to somewhere. So that's what we're doing with Little Bug Love.
Brian, from the police situation, so Cindy has, reflected on when she actually turned up to the police station. What is the one significant action that's happening in your world?
There's significant stuff. I don't know if you've been reading the papers. There's a fair bit going on in this space at the moment. Can I say in the time that we're going to be here in this 40 minutes, there'll be another 11 DV-related occurrences across this state as we speak. There are 89 recommendations that come out of the Women's Safety and Justice Task Force. The QPS has been given the lead on 7. I think DJAG have been given an inordinate number, about 68.
I've got 4 of my own.
Can I say, I'm going to be a little provocative. 4 of those recommendations are about primary prevention. 4. And 3, I think, relate to an already existing, quite successful program in education, which is respectful relationships. When we get involved, it's too late. I'm sorry, but what we've just spoken about is all about response. And we've got a critical part to play in that. I'm not hiding from that. We will always have a critical part to play at the time of crisis. But why should all the effort be in the response? And here we are talking about homelessness, and forgive me because I'm probably speaking to the converted. Why is it that women, predominant victim, I'm not playing games with gender and all the rest of it, we can all play to the exceptions, and the exceptions do exist. Why are they the ones leaving homes with their kids? Where are the options to find alternative pathways for men? The perpetrators. And I am already hearing about innovative practice even in some of our most isolated and First Nations communities, where they are taking the ball up with innovative ideas about places for the men to go so that it's not the women and the children leaving their place of safety. You asked me a question, I didn't answer it. The answer is probably this one. What do I see that's happening? We are, for the first time in a long, long time, talking together. And I'm now engaged with Amanda's team and with our HRTs in integrated response. This is not going to be fixed by police. It's not going to be fixed by anybody alone. And for me, I think we're on the threshold of an opportunity to really come together and deal with this from woe to go. And that's what I'm excited about. Thank you.
Julie, legally, what is the one?
Okay, I have to agree with the previous speakers. It is a really exciting time in Queensland in relation to the many advances that are happening and the recommendations and report and the focus that currently we have on domestic violence and especially coercive control. I'm a lawyer. I agree with what the previous speakers have said in relation to it's beholden on all of us to work together, and then nothing can happen if we don't work together. I'm quite keen on laws that articulate the standard which we want to hold each other and ourselves and the community to. So whilst I might have a bias towards laws, I still believe that the impact of actually having the law, the impact of developing the law and having the conversations about what law should be there is a process of community awareness, community education and community transformation. So I know that the law's not going to do it, police response not going to do it, but it actually does engage people in a conversation. And we are all the better for having these conversations about what is domestic violence, what is respectful relationships, what is coercive control, because until we actually started talking about potentially having a law that had that, we were actually still quite naive, in my view. Because, believe you me, the definition of coercive control has been in the Domestic Violence Act for years. So it's actually about going, hey, let's talk about it, and this is a way that we can talk about it. So what Women's Legal Service has been doing, and really, I do think that we're on the precipice of really quite seismic community and cultural change. And I hope I'm not being too naive, but I'm a little bit stubbornly optimistic. At the moment, as we speak, Brian and I have been involved in the Commission of Inquiry into Police cultural attitudes and their responses to domestic violence. So that's one part of the pie, the complex puzzle here. We've got the Hear Her Voice that has come out of the task force of the Women's Safety and Justice Task Force. Very, very comprehensive, looks at the state, interstate and national responses to domestic violence, really drills down to the cultural issues that enable a culture of the domineering and the frightening coercive control to happen in a private relationship, but not only that, but not even be identified by the victim. I think that's really huge. So we've got those recommendations. Today there was an announcement that DV Connect was getting more funding. We've got 10 days of paid leave for people who are domestic violence survivors. We're on the precipice of the first tranche of the coercive control recommendations being rolled out, and they are about including a more expansive understanding of what domestic violence actually is. So I could list many, many things. I personally am always excited when people say, let's actually turn this into a law, because it says to me the community has had enough, that they actually do want some consequences. Thank you.
Amanda, so you're leading integrated response teams for high-risk victims around the state. What do you see changing?
Well, not so much changing, I think continuing. So the integrated service response that we're starting to see, and that was out of Not Now, Not Ever, government introduced high-risk teams. So the high-risk team brings together QPS, corrections, health, a lead in non-government organisation specialising in domestic violence, and those services working together and importantly sharing information about our victim and her children in a safe space allows hope. Well, we are very comfortable that we have saved many lives through the high-risk teams and the integrated service response over the years. It's really hard to put a number on, but you know there are many women who have been moved safely into refuge and then through to housing, and housing are just such an important part on our integrated service response team.
Rachael, from your perspective, on the ground in Logan, and you know, talking to young girls every day, what do you see as the biggest action that's making change?
Yeah, I think in this space there's been a stronger push for consent education, particularly in the last 2 years, which is great to see. And I think that's well overdue. I think my team and I have been doing this work for more than 5 years now. And before that, there was no service provider or option available to schools to contact to do this work. And often teaching staff feel unequipped or uncomfortable to hold those conversations with young people. So I find that emphasis and that switch of making it a priority is really good. But we can't just say it's a priority and then not follow it up. I think that there needs to be an emphasis on connecting schools to adequate service providers, and also allowing young people to have access to those resources. We know that young people in Logan, not everyone has access to, they just can't jump on a bus down the road to their local service provider. They may not be able to pick up the phone. So what's practical for them in that sense? But yeah, particularly I think the push for consent education is great to see, but that does need to be followed up by some more, I would say, solid action.
Thank you. I'm actually going to just switch to an observation that I made that I had recently that made me feel really uncomfortable. And it was the coroner's report for the Hannah Clarke case. And the statement was made that nothing could have been done to prevent her death. Now that really impacted me. And Brian, I want to hear from you.
I respect the coroner's decisions, but let me tell you this, I can't look in Lloyd and Sue's faces and say as a member of a police department that's tasked with protecting our community and say to you that I'm going to accept and be satisfied with that outcome. It may well be that the system made it very difficult for us to pick up on the indicators that we should have been alive to. It may have been that the system prevented us from taking action in the way that we might want to happen to, but that's not an acceptable answer as to us being able to do what we need to do to prevent these from happening again. So I guess that's the challenge. Let's change the bloody system. Because we have to learn more and more about these indicators early in the piece. And it's incredibly complex, but being complex isn't an excuse for not doing it. So, you know, from my perspective, I understand what the coroner said within that system. It may have been difficult, but as your member of your police department, I'm not going to accept that, and we're going to keep trying hardest to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Cindy, from your perspective, what can change?
Well, I really appreciate that from Brian's perspective that he doesn't accept that as a police officer. Like, I really appreciate that. But being on the other side of that, I found out during our court process that I was probably the 7th or 8th woman that this man has done this to, and he's unstoppable. It's that simple. He is an insidious disease, and every time he's done this to someone, he's learning more from the justice system on what he can do and can't do next time. And that's how he keeps going and going. Even during our court process, he was bringing new girlfriends to that. Some people aren't going to be stopped, and I'm so sorry. because I know that that's not what anybody wants to hear. It's not what I wanted to hear. But nobody could stop this man. The police, fortunately in our case, they were amazing. I cannot fault the police. They showed up every single time and they did the best for us. And the day that the courts let this man out on bail, the police officers rang me in tears because I was halfway home and they told me to turn around. I couldn't go home. He'd just been released. And they were as distraught as I was. And there was nothing that could be done until he breached again and put himself in a position where he could be caught, because he was a master of hiding. He couldn't be stopped.
So Julie, from a legal perspective, so let's talk about the law and how it's being implemented at a community level, at the grassroots, to help keep women safe. What are the most recent legislative changes that are happening to protect against coercive control?
Well, as I said, the state government has already announced the rollout after really comprehensive community education, training, support and resourcing, the criminalisation of coercive control. So that will be happening next year. And really importantly, all of the evidence from other jurisdictions shows that that offence is only successfully litigated if there has been a background in high investment of training, resourcing and support. That if we just lob a new law in, it is ineffective. So I'm just so encouraged that, that in my view at least, the state government is actually doing it the right way, in the right order. Having said that, I should also point out that whilst we continue to expect women to leave their houses with the children, there is still going to be a bias for women to say, I won't leave now, I can't leave now, it'll be too disruptive on me, but mostly the kids. And whilst we have a family law system that still has a presumption of equal shared parenting, perpetrators will continue to control victims and women by saying, I'll take the kids. I'll take the kids, I'll have them 50-50. Right? Now, please don't underestimate how frightening that is for a woman with her kids, knowing that if she leaves, she's actually going to probably be asked by a court to leave the kids with him unsupervised. I can't even tell you how many women I've spoken to have said, it is better for me to be there because at least I'm keeping an eye on him. So this is not a one-size-fits-all answer. I'm a lawyer, so I'm always going to go to the laws. What do the laws say and how can we use them better? And how do they need to change to make things safer? So there's just a couple of examples.
Amanda, do you have anything to add to that with your experience?
I was just going to reflect, if we go back to our survivor story that was so beautifully told earlier in the morning, there were 3 mentions in that story about her safety plan. And I am really pleased that the Queensland Government has just reviewed our common risk and safety framework, and that tool is going viral, hopefully. That's my plan. So we will have common language around that safety plan, and it will travel with her and it will move as her situation moves. And I think that's going to be eyes on the perpetrator. And I do sort of agree with the coroner. He was a baddie. They're hard to manage, but let's have eyes on him. Let's know what he's doing, and let's make her plan really focused on her and the children, but keep an eye on him as well.
Thank you. I'm going to open the floor up to questions now for this panel. I'm sure there are questions in the audience.
Okay, hang on, I'll pass this one here.
Sorry, just piggyback on what you've just said there with keeping eyes on him, how would you pose that as a suggestion? Because if there is no, and I'm not sure perhaps others can weigh in on this, if there's no legal precedent at that point in time to be keeping eyes on him, who does that and how do we kind of get that information back to the services that are working with her?
Well, I think in Cindy's example, she had excellent police who were on the ground and rang her. He's out of remand or he's on parole. But what we have is a lot of women who aren't connected to their police officer, they're not connected to corrections. So what the integrated response does and what the safety tool does is says to corrections, hey, when he's remanded, you've got to ring her or you've got to ring her service. So I think that, and you can do it. The legislation says you must share that information. We're never going to make the courier male because we didn't tell them, he was out on parole. We're going to save her life potentially. Turning around the car is the perfect example. So I think what we really want to see in Queensland, and it sort of goes to to the whole crux of this panel, how do we make her safe? We make her safe by giving her the power to make her plan, but giving her some extra tips. But yeah, putting eyes on him. And look, corrections aren't on this panel, but they are really working super hard as well and working out that they need to work with other agencies like health, like housing. So, and I can see Brian nodding. In the 5 years I've been here since Not Now, Not Ever, we have seen real change. And I think sometimes we can reflect on what is negative or what is bad. But just last week I was in Bundaberg and Rockhampton, and I met with our refuges, and both of them had stories of women exiting refuge to housing because housing have prioritised women with domestic and violence situations. So, they are wonderful stories and we need to celebrate those.
Any other questions?
Can I add to that though, with the spirit of not bringing it down, and it's a really good question. So let's face a few facts. There's 125,000 domestic family violence orders in place in Queensland right now. Now, what we know is only a relatively small number of those are likely to go on to present a serious escalation in the terms that have got so much quite understandable publicity. We don't have the capacity to monitor 125,000 orders. So what we need to do is work together as best we can to work on better tools to help identify and understand those who present with the most serious high risk and high harm, and invest significantly our scarce resource, and I'm not just talking about the police department, all of us, the scarce resources in the direction where it might best be an intervention, and understand that. There's been discussions around having the registers, and I'll leave the legal minds, etc., as to whether that's appropriate. But we've been comparing it to the CPAW register, the Child Protection, or the Child Offenders Register. Well, there's about 3,000 or 4,000 of those in the state. If we're talking about a similar register, we've got to understand this scourge that we're talking about is endemic. It's endemic in our community. It's not an outlier, and it has to be approached in a different way than if it is an outlier. And that means an investment from all of us, and that's why I'm encouraged by it. And can I take the point? Calling it out and calling it a law by its very nature, even if it's going to be difficult to prosecute or convict on, by stating it that we as a community do not stand for it so much so that it's now against the law, is a powerful message. Yeah, thanks.
And I'd just like to say, just to kind of follow on from that question, what has been really showing some very, very positive results in terms of turning domestic violence perpetration around has been community and policing working together and basically saying to perpetrators, if you want help, because we think you do, here's the community response, here are the services. If you don't want help, even though we think you do, here's the police, and they're going to be popping in and seeing you. They're actually just going to randomly turn up. And they will charge you when you text and pretend it's just contact for the kids. You know what I mean? So it actually does. There are strategies that work, but I do really agree that we do need to be working together, and it does need to be something that we're always calling out. That we're not going, well, he doesn't have a domestic violence order, so it mustn't be domestic violence. We know, we can see when someone's a standover or when they're a bully. We cannot.
But not many women can. Not many women in that relationship see it like that.
But other people do.
Yeah,
but other
that's
people
right.
can see it.
And because we're starting a new relationship and we're caught up in that moment and we're compromising, we're finding out how we fit into each other's lives. By the time we realise we're in an abusive relationship, something bad's happened and we've turned around and gone, how did we get here?
Yeah.
And
but
that's
often
when
people
we
around,
realise, not until then.
Yeah, but often people around can see it.
We don't listen to them.
But,
we know better.
But they've always got friends. They're not by themselves.
Yeah.
They've got co-workers. They've got friends. They've got family.
You isolate yourself a lot.
Yeah.
women do that. We isolate ourselves and insular that because we want to fix it, and we don't want everybody else knowing that we're trying to fix that. And my thing now is, after our DV experience, I'm never fixing anyone again. You need fixing, fix yourself. Not my problem. And because I was raised to be a fixer, and that's caused this pattern of these relationships. You know, when you're a kid, no, you'll be right, just fix it, just fix it, just fix it. And it's who I became. I became a fixer, and now, no, fix yourself. I'm done.
We've got a question down the back.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on something you raised, Brian, and the others, why it's always the woman that has to move. Is there anything in the new legislation or anything that we're pushing that we can have a system where the bloke moves?
In the DV Act at the moment, there is actually provisions for ouster orders, and an ouster order is exactly what it sounds like. It's like the judge saying, you need to move out. So we have that in our domestic violence order. The interesting thing about that is that there are always exceptions. And so, for example, one of the things that the court has to consider is, does he have anywhere else to live? And it's I've actually been in court where this happens. And he'll go, no, I don't have anywhere else to live. And so the court will go, well, okay, he can stay there, and you've just got to be of good behaviour towards each other. So I think we do have the powers to get the perpetrator to move out, but then also think about who's the person who's most likely to be earning an income if it's a family with young children. So even if he moves out, can she afford to pay the mortgage? Then when it comes to family court, he's going to say, I'm going to have the kids half the time, I'm not going to pay the mortgage. So nothing is as simple as we expect. So it's a great question, but that's actually the answer legally.
Thank you. Where I was heading is we're a housing provider for older single women and women and kids out of DV. Do I start to look at a model to send the blokes to?
Can I say, I think absolutely. Do you know, there's something that I remember when I was the Assistant Commissioner for South East Region, so that was the Gold Coast and Logan between 2015 and 18. I started at the Gold Coast 4 days after Tara Brown's death, and there was a sequence of horrific tragedies there. We shouldn't call them tragedies because we should be stopping them. There's no doubt about it. I remember listening to a radio program there at the time, and there was a victim of DV who, in fact, was railing against this, that she wanted to stay at home and didn't want to go to a shelter or alternative provision of accommodation. And she really set me back on my heels when she said, because at least when she's home, she was in control of an environment and she knew where he was. But when she went to alternative premises, there was the extra layer of not now knowing where he was and not being in control. So I share Julie's view. This is so complicated and so complex. Can I tell you another thing? Do you know that we can send a couple of police officers at the moment to a life-threatening situation out there and have to make choices about whether they take a life? 2 young officers. But to ouster somebody, we have to get senior sergeant approval from somewhere in the state. There are so many levels of bureaucracy and administration around this, which is also what we've got to look at to simplify the responses. Thank you. Thanks.
And if I can just add, I think if we do consider her, these women, like Cindy has explained, have had years of just being told they are rubbish, they can't pay bills, they can't do this. So at least when they go into refuge and they're really supported, they don't come out until they can take on that head lease, till they can pay the bills, really feel strong, have employment. So there's, I do think if you've got capacity though to have room for him to move, that is a need, but we do have to be mindful of her and the years often that she's dealt with, just horrific kind of coercive control.
All right, well, I think we have just about run out of time, and I think, wow, you've all made such an impact then. Would you please put your hands together for such a powerful lineup of speakers? We are addressing who are the key players in the housing and community service sector. How do the key players work together to provide invaluable support to women and children? What role does safe and stable housing play in protecting young women and children? And what are the sector's biggest challenges and what needs to be done? So let's bring up our panel. Starting with Christine Castley, CEO of Multicultural Australia. Christine delivers reform and innovation projects, disaster management, response and recovery, and public sector ethics and integrity reform. Now, can I just also reiterate something I said earlier? I'm only giving you a very brief overview of their bios. Please go online and have a look at their full bio, or maybe go even deeper and have a look at where they work and what they're doing, or hang around after and have a chat to them. So I'm only really giving you a brief outline. Carolyn Curry is the Integration Manager of YFS. Carolyn leads a team of housing specialists embedded in the YFS family support teams. Carmel Hoare is Community Lead of Brisbane Zero, a place-based cross-sectoral strategy to end homelessness. Rebecca Olkers is the CEO of BHC. BHC is one of the largest community housing providers here in Queensland. And Kiana is an integration and high-risk team case manager, the Centre for Women and Co. Kiana focuses on increasing safety and perpetrator accountability through risk assessment, safety planning, integrated service responses and risk mitigation. To host this panel, please welcome Karen Dare, the CEO of Communify. Give them a nice big warm welcome. Thank you.
So excited. We've got a real mix of providers, housing, support, specialists. So I think we're going to learn a lot today. So thank you for your time. So we're going to explore this issue of collaboration, particularly how your organisation seeks to work with others to achieve real results. Is it about informal networks, or is it more about establishing formal ways of working? And does our current system support that? So Christine, I'm going to get you to kickstart. Can you talk to us about Multicultural Australia, your experience of collaboration, and what does it take to make those relationships work, particularly for those women from multicultural backgrounds?
Thanks very much, Karen. And I'll just begin by acknowledging traditional owners of the lands on which we're gathered. I just wanted to start by coming back to the theme of the all of us together, and to make the point that when we speak about all of us, we're not talking about a homogenous one group of people, single group of people. And we think about the systems, there's probably two consequences that flow from that. It's a system that's very much under pressure, and so we go for checklists and systems to be able to deal with it quickly, which makes it very anonymous and depersonalised. And that's what can sometimes happen to someone who's going through a very emotional, traumatic time when they're trying to deal with someone under a lot of pressure. But the other piece in terms of response to that is we go for a whole range of specialist services to try to deal with the various cohorts. And that then runs the risk of silos. And because people are just, again, under significant pressure, dealing with a lot of issues and a huge demand, and just trying to manage your space. So at Multicultural Australia, just to give you a very quick synopsis of what we do, so we're the refugee settlement provider for Queensland. We provide frontline refugee and migrant services. About 2,000 to 5,000 refugees arrive in Queensland each year. Within that cohort, there are families who arrive, and we support people right from the moment they arrive at the airports through getting them settled into housing, into schools, those sorts of things. What we often find is that there are instances of domestic violence which don't appear immediately. They kind of come out a bit later in that journey of the 18 months or so that we look after people. Or sometimes the pressure and the stress of the resettlement kind of triggers behaviours which kind of are latent. But we also get within that cohort, we do have, and perhaps people don't realise these, women who arrive with children who are actually domestic violence refugees, who've sought protection within their countries and arrived. We also look after unaccompanied minors who come. These are amazing young human beings who some have fled war-torn areas on their own, as young as 10, leading up. We look after them till they're 18. And there's often a range of issues there around sexual violence type histories on their journey. So, and then as we look after teenagers, all of those issues we spoke about earlier around the issues around porn, around kind of social media and what happens around their instances. So that's to give you the context of the experience that we have in terms of being a frontline case manager service provider to those clients. We do deal with domestic and family violence a lot, and we deal with the risks that flow from that in terms of homelessness a lot. We are not a specialist domestic and family violence provider. And so we act in terms of trying to provide warm referrals, and we do work, we do fantastic work with many of the partner providers across the sector. But we do kind of encounter some of those issues that come up when you are not a human services provider trying to deal with the domestic violence, family violence sector. And if I can give you one example, so where we have instances where we will assist a woman and potentially her children to leave a DV situation, and potentially the DV shelters is the solution to that. We do get them into there, and it's fantastic stuff, but the case manager will often find that they're not allowed access to the shelter for very, very legitimate reasons, because the DV shelter's going, we're supporting that person, but there's a whole raft of other issues that sit around that person: language, culture, mental health trauma from their refugee experience, a whole range of issues that are not being addressed. So it's about those partnerships that we need to work through. Having said that, what we also find often is because we are the multicultural provider for Queensland, that when instances come up when people from call backgrounds come to services and the system is very much under pressure, people will automatically say, look, we don't have capacity, but go see Multicultural Australia. And we'll say, but we're funded to do people in their first arrival, you've been here for about 10 years. And then it's this, there's a thing about trying to help the person, but if you think about the person being sent from one door to the next, we can't help you, but really the specialist provider who will help you is that next door in the midst of trying to deal with that thing. And what we often find is the person will say, this is too difficult, I'm just going to go back and just deal. Because clearly there's not those. So it's just thinking through how we kind of manage that kind of travelling through gates and doors, that we kind of try to avoid that in terms of working together. We're all coming at it with the best intent of the world, but sometimes in our busyness, we create the barriers. And it's just trying to think through having that consciousness and rising above ourselves in terms of getting those responses. The other piece I'll raise too, we have offices in Brisbane, Toowoomba, Rocky, Townsville, so we see some of the rural regional dimensions of this issue as well, and the instances of what you have to respond to. We've had to, in Toowoomba, for example, not only move the victim, the female, out of the home, out of Toowoomba to Brisbane to get her away from that circumstance. We've had to move our case manager as well, because what's happened as he's gone in and out on bail proceedings, he has firstly gone to wherever she was living, but then once we moved her out, started coming to our offices to come after the case manager. So these are the circumstances that we need to think about in terms of rural, regional type responses, and how we need to respond, because we're Queensland, and that's the reality of who we are in terms of where our populations are. And if I can just make a final point about all of us together, is to make that point as service providers, we sit in these spaces and have these conversations and think about them. And I often find myself in social settings, not often, but sometimes, where I'm actually surprised to find I'm in a group of people where this stuff is not front of mind. And that's fantastic for them. But you kind of become the party pooper a bit, because when they ask you what you do and you start talking about this stuff and you're passionately talking about your thing, and you suddenly realise there's silence and everyone's going, right, well, on to happier things. There's a piece about bringing the community with us, because we've talked about how we can't do this on our own as service providers. We can't do this on our own as a sector. This is an issue that's endemic. And the really, really important point that I really need to make, because I'm from Multicultural Australia, is if you look at the census data in Queensland, 1 in 3 people was from a call background, multicultural background, and 50% of our community have been born overseas or had a parent born overseas. That's the reality of who we are, and we need to get a whole lot more culturally capable in our responses and recognise that that is the reality of the population, that we're the people who we're here to serve.
Thank you. So, Carmel, Brisbane Zero. It's a unique collective impact model of sharing information and data to ensure that we have a joined-up approach in supporting the most vulnerable people in our community. We're part of it, so we know how it works. We're very excited that you're going to talk to us about today and let everyone know what do we do as part of Down to Zero, and what sort of impact is it making?
this working?
Yes.
Firstly, I wanted to say thank you very much to Mr. and Mrs. Clarke. Collaboration is at the core of solving these problems, so thanks very much. Brisbane Zero, everyone talks about the data aspect of Brisbane Zero. Zero actually means that homelessness is a crisis, not a way of life. That's what our aim is, to make homelessness a crisis, not a way of life. The data is actually human profiles. So we, as a collective, there's about 18 organisations across Brisbane who are members of Brisbane Zero, and we know the homeless people that we support by name. And it's very, very simple. We register those people by name and monitor and manage that list. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about collaboration, given that this is the theme, and I think it's a very easy word to say, and people look at it as a noun rather than a verb. It's actually very difficult to do collaboration well. I come to micro projects in Brisbane Zero about 12 months ago. I've got a very new lens. I come from creative industries where I've managed and created, I don't know, hundreds of collaborations across my career. And what I've learnt being at Brisbane Zero is that the problem of homelessness in this city is so much bigger than I had ever imagined, and has such a diverse population experiencing homelessness. And that's one of the things that Brisbane Zero does very well with the group of organisations, is understand the whole of the population that are experiencing homelessness. And without going into all of the data collection and how we do things, I wanted to talk more about the practical side of things and the understanding that Brisbane Zero and the group that we work with, it's actually a very sophisticated movement in that it harnesses all of the different modes of collaboration. So you've got open collaboration, like today, where we're sharing information, we're sharing stories, and we're all in this together. And then you've got closed modes of collaboration, like Christine was talking about with domestic violence and family violence. Like those collaborative and coordination groups need to be closed for a reason, like there's safety reasons for that. And then there's different types of governance that are needed for the different array of issues that we're talking about. So that might be a flat governance we've set up because we know the data around women experiencing homelessness, and their families and children are falling into homelessness far more than we know. Well, we know now, don't we, Karen? So we have set up initiated a Housing for Women's Safety Alliance. There's so many acronyms in this world, but I got that one right. So we're setting up that alliance, which will be both open and closed as a collaboration, where the specialists, and when I say closed, I mean, you know, the specialists will come to the table and understand the problem, identify the problem. There are solutions for the problem. How do we communicate those problems? And the best people in the room, the brains trust in that room, will identify that from the Brisbane Zero data that we've collected. So the other thing that Brisbane Zero does really well as a group is we fall into three main themes of preventing homelessness, reducing homelessness, and ending homelessness. And each of those areas of work have a number of activities where, again, there's specialist people doing each of those activities and sharing the information about that. So just quickly as an example, I spoke about the Housing Women for Safety Alliance. That would be what we would call a preventing activity, where we're looking at the data around women and forming an advocacy group with that evidence and taking those stories to the hierarchical governance, i.e. the government, and saying, we've got this problem, this is the portrait of people that we've painted that have this problem, these are the types of solutions that we need. I think importantly we need to know that throwing $1 billion at this problem tomorrow is not going to solve it. Collaboration is going to solve it. Information sharing is going to solve it. And then the reducing piece is about the collection of data. And the data is not, as I said, it's not just data, it's actually humans. And what we've been able to achieve with over 3 years of collecting that information, and it's not everybody that's homeless in Brisbane, it's the people that represent, or present, I should say, to our service providers, to the service providers that are part of the collaboration. They give their consent for their name to be on the register. They also give their consent, about 50% of people give their consent for a vulnerability survey to be taken with them, and that's part of the engagement process with the support workers. And from that, we can paint a portrait of who those people are, and we have just published the fact sheets based on 3 years of that information sharing across the Brisbane Zero collaboration, so thank you very much for that. And I hope that you can see more clearly who it is that's falling into homelessness in Brisbane through that information. To end homelessness, we believe that we need to scale up the investments in the housing, the support services, and we actually need to innovate with what we've got. As I said, we can't just think we're going to chuck $1 billion at it and it's going to fix tomorrow. It's actually, we need to work with what we've got now, and I'm sure we've all got many ideas about that. So the power of our collaboration.
About that later.
Oh, good. Sorry.
We've got some blue sky thinking happening later on. Look, Carolyn, YFS has a designated. Well, you're the designated integration manager. Keen to know, was that developed to manage both internal and external relationships? And what are the benefits that you've seen from that?
Yeah, look, I think it started as an idea internally about how we work better together, how we join things up and deliver services seamlessly to people, because people really need that when they're in crisis. They need a coordinated response, and they need a team, and they need a wraparound response. So bringing all of that together and anchoring it, we identified in our organisation, hey, we do lots of different things, but we could do them better and we could do more together. I guess now we're really starting to look at more and more we've always kind of collaborated out there, but we're looking more and more at what are these integrated responses, who can we partner with, what can we do, well together, who will do what. Integration is really, really incredibly challenging to do. And when I made my notes to talk here, I must have been channeling Minister Enoch, who funds one of the programs that sits under me, because I wrote down weaving, and it is this real weaving together. And another kind of little thought I've had about it is integration is like bringing things together that maybe don't typically go together, or that we don't expect to see together, or that don't fit together easily. And it's a little bit like salad dressing. So oil and vinegar. And if you just bring them together and sit that there, it separates. And integration needs shaking. Things need shaking up. So I guess I would kind of implore everybody working in the community services sector to have a think about whether they're shaking things up. If you're kind of sitting there going, I'm really comfortable with what I do, you're not probably doing integration. Integration is not comfortable. It involves ongoing communication, assessing, reassessing, really high levels of trust. At times you have to accept someone else's, risk assessment, and a much more open sharing of information. Those things are really critical if we're going to keep women and children safe, if we're going to hold people using violence accountable, and if we're going to resolve the real kind of complexities and compoundedness of homelessness and domestic violence.
I love that analogy of shaking it up. It's a bit of a Taylor Swift song, but that's fantastic, and it's so true. I mean, we're in lots of collaborative relationships. I think we're dating most of you, and it's like dating. You really have to get to know each other, you have to trust each other, you have to take risks. But no, thank you, that's a great analogy. So, Kiana, when we spoke earlier, you were talking about being more strategic and intentional in building an integrated service response.
Going out to other services, connecting and saying, hey, what are you guys doing? What are we doing? And how can we do this better together? We, I think definitely have made massive shifts over the years from working in that really siloed response. There's definitely still a really long way to go, but that all comes from that interagency collaboration that everyone and all the other panels have spoken about today. Some of the really, tangible, practical things we've done, the Centre for Women and Co is really fortunate to be the funded service for the Logan Bean Leigh High Risk Team as the Domestic and Family Violence Service. So that's actually a really great example of that multi-agency collaboration. So that's a team specifically designed to respond to imminent risk of lethality for families in the Logan and Bean Leigh region for domestic and family violence. So that's actually a really collaborative effort of the Centre for Women and Co as a domestic violence service, but we have Queensland Police, Corrections, Youth Justice, Health, Housing, Victims Assist. All of those agencies, child safety, really play a key role in us being able to increase the safety of women and children and also increase that accountability for the person using violence. And we've seen really great outcomes. We've obviously seen the 3 trial sites after the Not Now, Not Ever report, but also now that we've got 8 across Queensland and more potentially coming on the way. It shows that a multi-agency collaborative effort works for domestic and family violence. And if we're looking at that, we know also that homelessness and domestic and family violence intersect massively, and that frontline work experience that I'd say 95% of the women that I support on my caseload, we're doing a piece of work around housing, whether it's needing to go into refuge, it's needing to sustain the tenancy. They've experienced really significant financial control and now can't afford to actually maintain the property. We're always doing pieces of work around housing, and that's why it is so important to have forums like these to be able to have these conversations around how we can work better together. And I think, we do that as well through the integrated service response. So we lead that for the domestic and family violence sector. So we have, many of YFS's programs attend that. And that's more of a formal space where we say, okay, what are the system gaps? What do we need to look at? Who can we get to present in this forum to tell us about what they're doing? So when we're supporting people, we know who we can refer to and who we can lean on for specialist knowledge, so we know we're not doing it alone, because that's the thing, is it's everybody's responsibility to work towards keeping women and children safe in the community. And I did want to mention one other, example of collaboration that we've done last year. We did a pilot program with Logan Central Police Station for a co-responder model, which is not something we've ever had in the Logan region before. And that was for cases of domestic and family violence. So it was actually a DV specialist embedded in the Logan Central Police Station to support the officers going out to the home and engaging with women that have experienced domestic and family violence to say, okay, let's do this better. How can we make sure that this is not repeat calls for service? And how can we upskill the police officers to better respond so we're getting better outcomes for the people that we're supporting? And that was just a 3-month pilot, and then we're actually really lucky to be funded by Small Steps for Hannah for an extension on that program this year. And now we've just seen a rollout for a 12-month opportunity for us to have that embedded DV specialist with police, which is definitely, we've seen some great outcomes of enhancing responses.
Thank you. That's very exciting, I think, running a pilot and then hoping that we can roll it out across Queensland. Good luck. I'm sure you'll do well. So Rebecca, as a housing provider, it's important for BHC to do 2 things: build us more houses and work with us to help sustain the tenancies of those people that you're supporting. So you've got a big job. So you've got partners kind of at both ends. Can you talk to us a little bit about the partners that you have at the moment in building new housing, giving us new supply, and also how you work with the sector around sustaining tenancy?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Karen. Look, as Karen said, Brisbane Housing Company, I'm from Brisbane Housing Company, I'm the CEO. we build housing. So we're a charity. We have built around 2,000 units of accommodation right across Brisbane and within Queensland as well. The statistics, though, in terms of the people that need housing, what we've done is an absolute drop in the ocean, really and honestly. So whilst we are a developer and we manage that housing and we have very, very supportive management principles, there's 116,000 people who are homeless every night in Australia. There's 550,000 families who are living in absolute housing stress every night, and that's just not being able to pay the rent, not being able to put food on the table, and paying like 70%, up to 70% of your income just on housing costs. And then in Queensland, we've got 50,000 people waiting on the public housing register. So the demand for housing is absolutely huge. And to my way of thinking, we've got to do something as a nation, we've got to do something as Australia to actually address this, and actually address this in a way that provides more housing, because a roof over your head is absolutely essential. It's 100% essential. It's the bedrock. You can't sort of move forward in your life if you don't have that roof over your head. So I think somebody earlier spoke about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I absolutely see housing as fundamental. And crisis housing is important, but long-term, safe, secure housing is what is required. And if we think about women and children escaping domestic and family violence, often the real obstacle in their way is thinking about, well, where do I go? Where on earth do I go? It's not as if you can just leave and then quickly snap up a rental property at an affordable rate. It's not as if you can just leave and immediately get social and affordable housing. It's really, really difficult. And so BHC, as Karen said, we're a housing provider, but we absolutely have to work with support providers and with people who will give us recommendations and referrals for people to our service. But look, from my point of view, the thing that is absolutely needed is more housing at scale. So when I was speaking before about that paltry, supply of housing that we have, we've got to do something more. So typically BHC has provided housing through grants. We've been given grants from government. We've actually got a really large housing portfolio. We've got about $350 million worth of housing. And as I say, that's terrific. But the scale of the problem is just so much bigger. We actually need to, as a nation, be able to actually move up towards providing up to 36,000 additional homes each year to be able to keep up with the need. So not just to keep an even playing field, but to be keeping up with that need that's ever growing. So quite recently, well, actually not quite recently, probably over the last 5 years or so, BHC has been advocating to government for different ways of actually providing housing, because government has got limited funds. There are limited funds to provide additional social and affordable housing. And I'm really, really pleased to say that the Queensland State Government has come out with a new housing fund, which is called the Housing Investment Fund. And we had advocated for this. And what it actually does is it enables us to get leverage through superannuation funds. So rather than it all just being on government shoulders to provide, funding for organisations like ours to build the housing, what this does is it actually enables superannuation funds to come to the party. We can leverage that money. And if you think about it, there's just billions and billions of dollars that are there in the super funds. A lot of those super funds absolutely want to be involved in the provision of safe, secure housing. They don't know how to. They're not sure how to actually do that. So I'm really pleased to say that just recently, in fact, I think it was only last week, we announced a partnership with the Australian Retirement Trust, ART, and that is going to provide the first pilot for doing 1,200 new units of accommodation across Brisbane. Now that's across 12 projects. They're all going to be long-term, safe, secure, affordable housing that's underpinned by superannuation money. The way that it all works is that government still provides a top-up, but it's a top-up to make the financial equation work. So it means there's less money required from government, so government money can go further. I am so excited about this. I've been in the industry for 15 years within BHC and probably 20 years working in social and affordable housing. A breakthrough like this is absolutely what we need, because if you can provide housing at scale, homelessness and housing stress sort of fade, it's never going to fade away, but we're going to be able to house people. Women and children escaping domestic and family violence are not going to have that barrier in their minds. They're going to go, yep, okay, I can go to a crisis accommodation, but then I know that I'll be able to get somewhere that's actually going to be safe and secure long term. So look, I'm really thrilled about that. It's very early days. Queensland government has been really innovative in this space, and the federal government has actually followed in these footsteps. So where we have a $1 billion fund in Queensland, the federal government also has a Housing Australia Future Fund, which is a $10 billion fund. And we hope to be able to leverage institutional investment through that as well, because it's only through getting this scale that we're actually going to be able to provide that bedrock for people. So yeah, very, very thrilled about that.
I know that you've been working very hard over a number of years for that, so really, really exciting. So look, one of the questions that we've got here is COVID. We all got agile, we all pivoted, we're all doing things a little bit differently. Really interested to hear, and just jump in, what difference has COVID made, do you think, to the way we're working together and perhaps how we're working together more closely with government, which is something that I definitely saw in my organisation. So jump in. Christine.
COVID was the thing that shook us up, I think.
It's
what I'll say as a... What I'll say as a CEO of a frontline service provider was I certainly found we had to suddenly break processes and break rules to be able to kind of do what we needed to do for our clients, which took us to a space which was very much about being person-centred and place-centred and into that. And so, what I say often with our case managers, social workers have a bit of a structured way of approaching their case management. We all do within our spaces. But what COVID did was it actually kind of sent challenges. The world suddenly had to change, where previously people kind of stuck to principle and ideology and philosophy. Suddenly all of that had to go out the door, and suddenly it was about, right, what's the situation in front of us? So I really hope we can keep that frame of thinking as part of business as usual. I think part of the risk is that people thought the crisis situation gave us permission to break the rules and break the processes. And the risk is that getting back into BAUs that we think we don't have that permission anymore. And there's good reasons, very good reasons. There's a lot of thinking and learning behind why those systems, processes around how we do intake assessment and case management and response should be framed. But getting the balance right there, I think, is something that we just need to be, I think we need to keep that energy going.
Carolyn, how did you go at YFS?
Look, COVID was really, it's really been really challenging for everyone. I guess we're a little bit, it's not quite over, and we haven't quite found the new normal. I guess what it has done is shine a big kind of glaring light on a lot of the deficits or barriers that are out there in our service systems and blockages, but it's also been a time to allow for innovation and exploring how do we come up with really creative solutions to problems and workarounds. And I think it's probably taught us all that we're far more resilient than we may have believed, and that there are creative solutions. I think in the way we've had to, work together but differently, it's probably allowed people an opportunity to look at things through different lenses, because you've kind of had to focus that little bit harder and have to put in a bit more effort to do that joined up work. I guess, it's provided an opportunity where, trying to work alongside someone in this really unusual cyber world or via Teams or Zoom, I guess, that's enabled all of us to take our glasses off and try on some different lenses to, be creative and innovative and still try and solve the problems that were there pre-COVID that just probably look a little bit different now. Yeah, definitely made us shake it up.
And, look, we know that, that we work together with Micah as the two homelessness hubs and put 1,700 people into accommodation. So do you want to talk a little bit about, we used our register to actually make sure that we had got to everybody that needed to come into accommodation?
The thing that struck me when I was researching what happened with that, when the public health response kicked in, was that within days, over 1,600 people were put into hotels and motels. We solved homelessness within days. And those people that were in the hotels were then assisted over the course of the next 12 months with the service providers, and there was 43 organisations collaborating on that project of getting people safe off the streets. And of that 1,700, over 1,500 were able to stabilise and find permanent solutions to housing from being on the street and being homeless. We solved it. So that's what the innovation piece did. Unfortunately, and I think that's a really positive thing, but unfortunately, I don't think we've carried that on. I think they seem to have fallen back into the old broken ways of doing things, and innovative thinking and creative thinking and problem framing has kind of, we don't have time for it again. And only yesterday I was at a motel visiting one of the inner city motels that we have people going to, and it really struck me that the guy that runs it, when I asked him, I said, how many visitors or tourists do you have in this motel now? And he said, I turn them away. I don't want visitors and tourists here. This is for the women and children. However, the family and domestic violence escapees are actually being housed on the ground level of an insecure motel on a main road. That is not a solution, and that's one of the solutions that came out of the COVID response, is stick people in motels and hotels. It's not a solution. So I think there's pluses and minuses to that, but it proved we could do it.
Rebecca, do you think it got government thinking a little bit more about investment?
Well, look, I think that the response from the Queensland government has been good, and I actually think they are thinking, and I really think that the Minister Leeanne Enoch is absolutely passionate about this. She's looking for new and innovative ways to do things, and I think she's really very acutely aware that you can't have stopgap measures, that they've got to be long-term solutions. So, to your point, I think that's very, very much front of mind for her. It takes a long time. The development process takes a long time. To actually develop new housing from scratch takes a long time. It's 2 years in the making. So I guess the thing that I would say is that I think what the Queensland State Government is realising is that we've just got to have a rolling program, that it's all about supply, it's all about the pipeline. The issue isn't going away, and we can't just do something quickly and then go, oh, that's that done. It's got to be a rolling pipeline, and I do think that there have been lessons learnt.
Kiana, how did you guys pivot, and anything new come out of it?
Well, I think for us, we had to completely change a service model. As a domestic and family violence specialist service that doesn't do outreach due to safety reasons and, prefers to do all of our work face-to-face, that it just wasn't an option. So we had to fully adapt, and for the first time in the operation of our service, we were working remotely, which is something very different. I think, like everyone said, we did have to get quite creative around how we did that. We did a lot of, I think even just for our team to be able to provide that support when we were all so isolated at home, we had to do a lot of team connection, which I think was really important for us getting through that COVID period, but also meant that if we were staying connected as a team, we were still able to provide that quality of support to the women that we were supporting. And we got creative in, we were doing Zoom sessions with children for DV-specific counselling, and looking at, what was appropriate to provide in terms of service provisions. But even in the integrated service response space, we initially, a couple of the meetings got cancelled because COVID, and then when we were like, okay, this is maybe a bit of a long-term thing, I think all of the agencies in the region started to really crave that connection as well. So we started seeing that we were having, the biggest attendance at the ISR meetings for our region that we'd seen in quite a while, because everyone wanted to come and everyone wanted to connect and see how everyone was adapting to COVID as well. So I think we were all very much leaning on each other as agencies in the region and going, okay, if anything, we need to up the ante with information sharing, connections, virtual meetings, and also just seeing and learning from each other. How are you guys doing this? How are you, changing your service model to meet a global pandemic? And so it was a really, whilst obviously it wasn't a great experience and COVID has been really, really challenging, it did bring some really beautiful outcomes of that interagency collaboration, I think.
Fantastic. So I just want everyone, we are going to
Yes,
quickly,
I know we're going to
I'm just
wrap
going to
up
do
and go.
one word. I'm just, look, we've still got barriers to collaboratively working together and integrating very closely. If we're blue sky thinking, just going to get you to give me one thing that we need to do each to blow up those sort of outliers, bring them into the inner circle. And what would it be, Christine? What would the one thing be?
I'm going to go probably weirdly negative, that to recognise that what we're doing is very complex and there is no simple solution. You have to accept that. It's not a reason not to try. There is no simple solution, and because simple solutions won't work, and that's what COVID showed us. They can work for a short time, but they won't solve the problems in the long term. So if we frame our thinking around that and how we try to tackle the problems, I think we'll get much further than we have when we talk about just putting in injections of funds or finding quick, simple solutions.
Keep coming down the line.
I would say that, I guess, with these really complex challenges around domestic and family violence and homelessness, we really all have a stake in that. It's everybody's business. It is everybody's business, and we all have an obligation to make some kind of contribution to the solution. Yeah.
I'm going to riff off that. I think that the community would be, the general community would be horrified to know that Micah alone put people into motels 4,008 times last year. And I think that there needs to be a willingness from the community to see this issue and see housing as critical social infrastructure, just like we see health and education. And that might mean that there'll be new types of housing in your street and in your neighbourhood. And if we learnt anything in COVID, it was about looking after and being kind in our own communities. So I think we need to take that into the community and talk about that when we're talking about homelessness.
A national housing strategy is what we need, and recognition that housing is a human right.
I'm going to say connection. I think there's benefits to connection, whether it's with your local services, specialist services, your clients, your community, everything. I think connection, and we just need to continue moving away from that really siloed response.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the wonderful panel. I think we've learned a lot today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you to our panel. We just do have a gift to give each and every one of you. And we do thank all of our panellists today. As I said, they've given up their time, but also their knowledge to share their experiences, but also their advice. So can we give one more big round of applause to all of our panellists? And that just about wraps it up. I have a few things to say before we do depart. The forum sessions, as I mentioned, will be online in the coming weeks. So please, if there's something else you want to have a look at or something you want to share with a colleague, friend, please do so. The handy guide, of course, is online. It's not going to do any good if it's not out there and in the community. So please spread the word about that, thehandyguide.com.au. And there's also hard copies, as we mentioned, if you do need those. We do encourage encourage you, there's a survey that's going to be sent or emailed out to each and every one of you, and we do appreciate your feedback on the survey. Yes, to know how today went, but also areas that you would like us to focus on or look at, or that needs to be heard. So we really appreciate any feedback you can give us in that. A big thank you to Victoria. Where are you, Victoria? Stand up. I mean, amazing. It's just taken on the role. Put together a very impressive list of speakers, and I'm sure, I think Louise mentioned a few sleepless nights, but I know something like today does not just take one phone call. It certainly takes a lot more. So well done. Congratulations, and an amazing lineup of speakers. I know you've asked me here just to thank a few people. The hard work of the planning committee, who have religiously shown up fortnightly meetings for the last 5 months and contributed in between those meetings. Thank you to Jenny and Leeanne, both directors of the Lady Musgrave Trust, Angela from the Department of Health, Suzette, Department of Housing, Sarah from Centrecare, Mary Millie, Rachael Watson, also to all the volunteers, Penny, Lani, Shawnee for their help on the ground, Bridget from the Centre of Justice, and Rebecca Harding from the Department of Housing, being beacons of solutions and support. I think they all deserve a very big round of applause. And just wrapping up now, thank you so much. My name's Leigh Muirhead. I have been involved in the forums over the last 2 years, but they've been online. So it's lovely to see all your faces today and actually be able to chat to you face to face. Our job now is, of course, to help achieve the aim, which is to have all women live in safety in Queensland. And collaboration is the word that we've all been throwing around here today. I love shaking it up, so let's do a little bit of shaking up. We can all do that. Just a quick little cups and saucers to our wonderful caterers over there. If you can, take them back to the table. Travel safe, enjoy the rest of your day, and please spread the word. Thank you.